Live.
Great. Looks like we are on live stream. So hello, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Annie. I'm going to be facilitating today's RPAG meeting. We are just waiting for folks to join, and then we'll get started at 10 or just a few minutes afterwards. So we'll go ahead and stay on mute for a few minutes, and thank you for being here. All right, well, welcome, folks. Thanks for being here for the RPAG meeting. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. We're just waiting for folks to join. Welcome, and we will get started very soon. Okay, we are right at a little bit after 10 a.m., so we can go ahead and get started. For the RPAG members, we'd love to see you update your names if you have a chance by just putting a comma and then maybe the organization that you are representing. That way we can just see who you're with today. That's always super helpful to have that right in the participants area. And I'll go ahead and get us started. So hello and welcome everyone. We're glad that you are able to be at today's last summertime resource planning advisory group meeting for the Puget Sound Energy. Resource Planning Advisory Group is for shorthand called RPAG. So you'll hear that acronym quite a bit towards the beginning. I'm Annie Kilberg-Smith with Triangle Associates. I'm going to be facilitating today's meeting as I have been for several months now, and welcome to all the RPAG members as well as the public observers. We're excited to have you join us during this summer wrap-up session, and thanks for taking the time away from work or from family or from the sunshine to be here with us. Next slide. Okay, so before we dive in, these are our Zoom controls. A couple things that we want to highlight for all of you. The Q&A tool is turned off. You can use the chat box for questions. You can raise your hand for questions, or if you are joining us via phone and just need to take yourself off mute, to say, hey, Annie, I have a question. I'll get you in the queue. We'll go in the order received. For the raise hand, just so you know, you do have to click on the reactions and then press raise hand. I know that can look a little tricky the first time you use it, so make sure you do that. And then for chatting, just want to let you know when you open up the chat box, there is a to box, and in that to box, there is a blue rectangle that says to hosts and panelists. If you drop that down and select everyone, that's super helpful so that the public that are viewing today's webinar meeting can also see what's in the chat. We will continue to remind you because I know that's an easy one to forget, but once you select it, you shouldn't have to select it again. It should default to that. Also, if you need captions, those are available in English and in other translated languages. Just test that out, and that's working. So feel free to let us know if you have any technical questions, and me or my colleague Ben can assist you. Okay, next slide. So a few quick facilitator requests to help keep things moving smoothly today. Let's just go ahead and keep the conversation constructive and courteous and respectful towards each other. I'll be here to help you guide the agenda and keep us on time. If you do use acronyms or technical terms, please try to give a quick explanation so that everyone can follow along. If something is outside the scope of today's discussion, please feel free to drop it in the feedback form or email isp@pse.com, and Ben's going to go ahead and put those items in the chat. The PSE does want to hear from you. Just if it's off topic today, it's an easier way for us to get that back to you without getting us off topic. And just as a heads up, public comment will happen after PSE's presentations and conversations. Today is a 3-hour meeting. So we'll make sure to pause at the last 10 minutes of the meeting to create space for that. Also, another heads up on that, we are going to change it so public commenters, if they'd like to, can share their video. We'll walk you through the steps to be able to do that when we get to that point. It can feel like a couple extra technical steps. So if you are a public commenter today, please just know in advance if you want to take those extra steps to show your video, and we'll walk you through that. Okay, next slide. So wildfire season is here, and we know that a little preparation can go a long way. So here's a few things to stay safe. We want you to make sure you have an emergency plan, so knowing your evacuation route and meeting spot if needed, and practicing that with your household. Building an emergency kit, including essentials like water, food, medications, flashlights, and other important documents. Make sure you have all those things on hand. Updating your PSE contact info to make sure your phone and email are current to receive outage alerts if needed. And then if you use a medical device that requires power, please register with PSE to get prioritized support for power outages. And then you can visit wildfireready.dnr.washington.gov for a custom prep plan from the Washington Department of Natural Resources. And we'll go ahead and put all of those hyperlinks in the chat today so that you can click on those, keep them in your browser, and maybe look at them later when you have a little bit of time. So we just want you to all stay safe and ready for this wildfire season that is already upon us. Okay, next slide. So we've got a large lineup of speakers today, and here's who you're going to be hearing from. You have Jennifer Colson, Manager, Operations and Gas Analyst. We have Ray Outlaw, Manager, Clean Energy Communications. Malcolm McCulloch, Manager of New Products and Services. Casey Curtis, Senior Market Analyst, Customer Energy Management. Tom Smith, Demand Response Supervisor, Customer Energy Management. Lauren Mullender, Manager, Load Forecasting and Analysis. Stephanie Price, Lead of Electric Load Forecasting and Analysis, and Chandita Das, Lead of Gas Load Forecasting Analysis. So lots of folks. So thank you all for being here, sharing your time and expertise with all the RPAG members. And then in addition to the speakers, we have other PSE colleagues and RPAG members here today to answer your questions and provide input. So for RPAG members and for PSE folks that I didn't introduce already, if you don't mind introducing yourself in the chat with your name, who you represent, and what you're hoping to get out of the agenda today, we'd greatly appreciate that. We'd love to see that information waterfall in. And Ben, if you don't mind putting that prompt in the chat, that can just help us get that going. Okay, next slide. So 3 hours today, and we have a full and engaging agenda. We're going to start with brief introductions and updates from the PSE team, followed by presentations on key planning topics, including vehicle to everything integration, energy efficiency, and demand response. We'll take a break as long as we have time, and then we'll dive into demand forecasts for both gas and electric. We're going to close out with next steps and time for public comment before wrapping at 1 p.m. We know that this goes over the lunch hour, so thank you for taking time during that lunch hour, but please also feel free to keep yourself fed and hydrated. So grab your food, stay comfy, and eat while things are moving. Feel free to stay off camera, especially during those pieces. It's great to see faces throughout the meeting. So if you would like to be on camera and engaging, that's also very helpful, just so we can see you all, but also know it's a long meeting and during the lunch hour. So just find that balance for yourself. Okay, next slide. All right, so today's meeting is all about keeping you informed and involved in the 2027 Integrated System Plan. We're going to start with a quick recap of the July public webinars that we just wrapped up, and then an update on PSE's Vehicle to Everything program. We're also going to walk through that energy efficient demand response inputs and spend time reviewing latest demand forecasts. So we want to hear your thoughts. That's the purpose of today, is really hearing your thoughts and feedback throughout the meeting. And I'll be helping to facilitate that through the chat and through seeing your hands raised and you all taking yourselves off mute. Next slide. And then we want to just mention, we really value your insights today. So as we move through the agenda, please share your questions, reactions, and advice on the topics that PSE covers. And we want to hear from as many of the RPAG members as possible. So please don't be shy to jump in and ask questions. Let PSE know if anything feels unclear, or if you think that they've missed something important, they want to see that. And then flag areas that might need a deeper dive or more discussion. That's always helpful for me as the facilitator to know. And then we want to help surface any risks, tensions, or points of misalignment early so we can address them proactively. So just helping name those things outright and directly is super helpful to both me as the facilitator and PSE as a utility. So your input really helps strengthen this planning process, and we're just hoping that you can engage in a meaningful way today and hope to hear from all of you. Any questions before we dive in? Great, and thanks for people putting their info in the chat. Hi, Dan. Hello, Megan. Good to see you, Quinn. And I know there's lots of others on here. Dennis, Donald, Ezra, Lisa. Yeah, lots of folks here. Eliza, thank you. Great. Well, nice to see everyone. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Ray and Jennifer to kick us off with the introductions and updates.
Thanks, Annie. I think I have the first quick slide here. Next slide, please. Okay, just last week, we finished another round of public webinars, and we wanted to provide a quick update on what we saw, what we heard. So we had 75 attendees, another 48 on YouTube. That was about a week ago. That number continues to climb a little bit. We discussed the schedule, but really focused on a quick recap of previous sessions, and then turned our attention to what resources could power the clean energy future. We talked a bit about what generation sources we use today and what generation sources we might use in the future. There was a lot of interest about emerging technologies like advanced nuclear and geothermal. And towards the end of the webinar, we invited participants to rank their clean energy priorities. That's the question on the bottom right corner of the slide here. And we got obviously a range of results, but I can say that reliable energy and keeping costs low were priorities for almost all of the customers. We're working on a meeting recap now, and we'll summarize these feedback questions and the survey question in that meeting recap with more detail when it goes out in a couple of weeks. But today we just wanted to provide a quick snapshot of what that conversation looked like. We're planning another set of 2 public webinars in the fall, so we'll have more details when those get scheduled and what that topic looks like, but that's the plan for now. And Annie, I think that's it for me, and I pass it over to Jen.
Thanks, Ray.
Great, good morning. Welcome. I'm here to kind of lay the foundation for the conversation this morning. And I think just taking a moment, this is our Tetris diagram. Hopefully it's very familiar to you at this point. And something I just wanted to point out to everyone is we've completed our puzzle, which is a really exciting milestone. This integrated system plan is definitely a marathon. And just taking a moment, I think we've been at this with this group specifically for a year. I think July of 24 was our first integrated system plan conversation. So we've done a lot of great work over the year, and it's taken a lot of time and energy from everyone on this call. So I just really appreciate everyone's time and input as we complete our puzzle piece here and lay our foundation. If we go to the next slide, as I mentioned, it's a marathon and there's a lot more to come. I think we're all really excited for the conversations through the remainder of the year. Today, we're really focused on the demand forecast for the gas and electric side, but as we look forward to the remainder of the year, we have some really good conversations coming up as well. So we have in September, resource adequacy results conversation regarding the electric resource needs. There will actually be a survey coming out to the RPAG members within a few days here to try and get that on the calendar. We're looking at the last week of September, I believe, so that'll be forthcoming. And then in October, we're going to talk about equity in the integrated system plan. And in November, we're really going to focus on that iterative gas and electric analysis. So this is something that's come up a few times regarding how are we, doing the load shifting within the scenarios between the gas and electric utility? How is all that coming together? And so the demand forecast for those various scenarios will be shared and discussed in that November RPAG. So if we move to the next slide, the reason I bring that up is if you recall our scenarios, so we have the reference on the bottom left of your screen and the scenarios regarding electrification and electric load increases as we go up the screen here. And so we're going to focus on today that reference case, box 1, current laws and requirements. So this is HB 1589, which the load forecast team will talk to you about their base assumptions for that reference case, but just to orient everyone on where we're at. And then for that meeting in November, we'll really be talking about the loads for those different scenarios. So I just wanted to give everyone that context as we dive into the fun conversation today. Any questions?
Thanks, Jen, for that framing.
Yeah.
Great. So I don't see any questions in the chat. We'll give folks a few moments though if you want to raise your hand and you have anything before we keep moving. And Jack, you can go to the next slide. Okay. I'm not seeing anything, so we can go ahead and keep moving. I know we've got a lot of ground to cover today. So with that, we'll go ahead and introduce Malcolm McCulloch to take us through vehicle to everything and the updates on that.
Great, thank you. And let's go to the next slide. So today I'm going to walk you through a couple things just to get an overview of what vehicle to X, which is the acronym we use for vehicle to everything. So talk a little bit about what that means and how PSE is engaged in some demonstrations today, and then a little bit about the potential benefits of vehicle to everything. So next slide. So we talked about the EV load forecast, and obviously managing those loads requires some comprehensive solutions from PSE. And really our focus is making sure that there are options for customers, to encourage either shifting, reducing, or sharing that energy capacity from those vehicles. So the suite of things that we are working on is time of use rates, EV demand forecast, specific rates for fleet depots, and then vehicle to home and building and vehicle to grid, which I'll talk about today, are additional options we're exploring. Next slide. So vehicle to everything kind of means a host of different things depending on how you deploy it. Mainly it is leveraging the capacity of the energy stored within the batteries of the EVs to power various loads. So here we have 5 different scenarios where it's either the load that is being picked up by a small appliance, like, a laptop or a phone. Obviously vehicle to vehicle, where vehicles will have the ability to charge other EVs. But the 3 scenarios that PSE is focused on are vehicle to home and vehicle to building, which are very similar. It's essentially using the battery on the vehicle to provide power to that facility. And then vehicle to grid, which is being able to leverage that capacity and have it exported to the grid for services. Okay, next slide. So PSE today is engaged in some technical demonstrations, and the focus is really making sure that we can do limited scale projects to really understand the capabilities of vehicle to grid. And there are really some very specific outcomes that we're driving towards. specifically looking at making sure that we understand the technical requirements and communication protocols that are going to be required to have these resources provide load to a facility and or to the grid. That also requires us identifying the types of interoperable equipment and also vehicles that are compatible with PSE's virtual power plant. Also creating some standards internally and for our folks out in the field to understand the interconnection of these vehicles to the grid and to the service, accessing peak demand and dispatch capabilities, and then ultimately evaluating sort of customer interest and understanding the mechanisms of compensation and what other opportunities we can stack on top of those. And I'll pause because I see Lauren's hand went up.
Lauren.
Yeah, thanks. I'm interested in these demonstration projects. I think this is really cool that you guys are doing this. Just curious if you could talk a little bit about kind of the process you went through working with site hosts, and what, if any, sort of inducements they need in order to participate in this. I mean, I'm thinking specifically about like the school districts. Were they, easy to kind of bring on board with this, or any challenges you guys have run into in trying to get these things off the ground? Just interested in learning more.
Absolutely. Happy to provide that backdrop. Maybe I'll just use that as a primary use case. And we are doing vehicle to grid testing specifically, you see in the middle of this slide, with 2 school districts. So we worked with our folks to do outreach to the school districts, mainly targeting those organizations that already had electric school buses. So the trick here is obviously you need to make sure that you have the types of buses that have the appropriate software capabilities to have bidirectional capabilities. And so part of our analysis was finding those school districts that had those types of buses and then doing outreach. We had folks that were very excited. Obviously, we have 2 school districts. The Olympia School District and Snoqualmie Valley School District, which we have engaged with to do these demonstrations. As you see there, we're installing 6 vehicle to grid chargers at those 2 school districts. That will allow us to, and that construction's underway right now. So to your question, Lauren, we did have folks that were excited and interested in joining in this effort. I think the biggest thing we heard from the school districts is they saw it more as an opportunity to expand their education curriculum and give kids an understanding of how the clean energy transition is happening and be able to see that happening directly in their school. So again, we had really great response and interest, and we have some other folks that obviously are kind of waiting for next level, but great engagement. So again, like I said, that construction is underway. We intend to have those chargers fully installed and operational by the end of Q3, and then we will initiate our testing protocol. And really, we're going to be testing 2 things, really validating that we have the ability to dispatch, demand response activities with those facilities. So having them curtail their charging when we have peak events, but then also being able to dispatch export from those batteries. And so that will really be a very technical capability, making sure the inverters are operating in accordance with our expectations, that it's safe, but also making sure that it doesn't interfere with the duty cycle of those school districts, and they'll be operating for their school year when we'll be going through this process. So it's a real world opportunity for us to learn. The other 2 vehicle to everything opportunities that we're pursuing is vehicle to home. And so this is demonstrating the bidirectional charging capabilities with passenger vehicles at residential homes. And so again, the main focus there is being able to validate that the vehicle can provide a backup service to the home, so serve the home load, and then also understand the capabilities for demand response. We have 6 charging sites we've identified. And we are in the process of finalizing procurement with various vendors. So again, this is a technology solution, so both the hardware and the software need to be integrated. And we expect to have at least 3 of those sites operational here in 2025, and then 3 more in next year. That is being done with PSE employees. And then we are also in our third use case, assessing the ability to use fleet vehicles stationed at commercial facilities to do vehicle to building capabilities. And we anticipate doing that next year, and potentially, reaching out to either, our fleet customers and or working with our internal fleet teams to do that demonstration. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So why is it a technical demonstration? I think this slide is really good because there is so much interoperability that needs to happen. This is an example of a school bus, right? So you've got DC electricity that's got to flow to and from the bus to a charging station that has that bidirectional capability, and an inverter specifically in that that will meet our standards for that flow of energy either back to the building or to the grid. In between that layer, the driver or fleet manager has a software solution where they are able to schedule their charging needs, make sure that their vehicles are operational for whatever duty cycle. And PSE has to then put its virtual power plant layer on top of that. And so there's a lot of interoperability and communication requirements and protocols that we need to get ironed out so that we can make sure that, one, the electricity is dispatched safely to either the building or to the grid, but that we have clear roles and responsibilities and agreements with the owners of the vehicles to operate them in a way that is going to be beneficial. And also then thinking about what might be the compensation or other programmatic incentive that would be appropriate to drive adoption and use of these capacity resources. Next slide. So when we look at the benefits, obviously they're both benefits for the system and the customer. Obviously, this is going to help us drive to a more resilient and robust energy grid. It helps us with different use cases such as load balancing and grid stability, peak capacity resources that we can utilize for additional capacity. And in some cases, depending on how clustered certain vehicles and bidirectional capabilities are, we may be able to defer distribution upgrades to leverage those units that are currently in market to help us with our capacity needs in a particular location. And for the customer, it's helping to drive lower energy cost. Demand charge mitigation is one thing that's important for fleets and school districts alike. There's also the ability for time of use rate arbitrage using the vehicle. And then backup power is a big piece of it, right? So having the ability to leverage the vehicle to back up either a home or a business in case of an outage or an emergency. And as I discussed, there's potential compensation for grid services that could be a benefit to the customer. Okay, I think that is it. Any questions?
Thanks, Malcolm. Yeah, RPAG members, you have questions for Malcolm? I'll give you all a few minutes to think.
I guess I'm wondering, this is Ezra Houseman,
Hi, Ezra.
in terms of how these how the pilot programs are going, what the level of participation is, whether customers are able to successfully have the dual use for their vehicles, ensuring that they have adequate battery for their other needs. What kind of reporting is going to be available for the public? It seems very, very important to let folks, and cost effectiveness, which I know is going to be a big challenge on this.
Yeah, so that's a great question, Ezra. And as I said, we're really in the sort of technical adoption and construction phase right now, so we haven't really initiated any of those activities to get that detail back from customers. But we will be doing an impact evaluation on the back end of this activity to really understand those expectations of customers. What was the experience? What were the state of charge requirements that customers felt was appropriate for their needs? So there's a lot of questions that we want to help answer, both from a technical as well as a customer perspective, that we'll be doing in that evaluation process.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ezra. Other questions from Malcolm?
Yeah, this is
Yeah, I'll go
Freud.
to,
Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
Froylan go first, and then I'll go to Eliza.
I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry if I jumped the gun, Eliza. Yeah, I just wanted to follow up, Malcolm, on Ezra's question of, do you have you have the timeline for the potential construction of the finalizing or starting the construction of the projects. The follow-up impact analysis, would it be, I'm guessing, would be after how long of a period do you expect to have these things? How much data are you going to collect?
Yeah, and so we are anticipating right now that within a year of collecting data, and we'll be able to leverage, the output of that. Again, these are very small scale technical demonstrations, so we want to be thoughtful about the fact that we're also going to be looking outside and understanding where our peer utilities are doing additional demonstrations and looking for, some ability to benchmark off of those details. But right now, it's intended that we would do these demonstrations for a year. And then be able to have that data available.
All right. Thank you very much, Malcolm.
All right, and then Eliza?
Yeah, Annie, it's Eliza.
Oh, Eliza, that's right. I'm
That's
so
okay.
sorry.
That's okay. Malcolm, my question was similar to Froylan's about the timeline, but you brought up another question, which is you talked about collaboration or seeing what other utilities are doing. Have there been demonstrations elsewhere of this technology? Are there other, like, who might be the collaborators on this? Just out of curiosity, or where have you seen information about this
Yeah, so
elsewhere?
absolutely. Thank you. It's a great question. They are doing some demonstrations down in California. So PG&E is doing demonstrations as well. We also are engaged with a variety of different organizations and associations that have put together collaborative conversations between utilities and both the vehicle charging providers as well as the original equipment manufacturer vehicle owners or sorry, manufacturers. So there's a host of organizations and groups that are trying to crack this nut, and so we are stepping into all those conversations and trying to learn, as long as we also are getting our own processes and standards in place.
Thanks for that question, Eliza.
Yeah, I guess maybe just probing a little further, is there a name of any of these organizations yet? Or just if we wanted to understand what else is out there?
Yes, I know, of course, in my head the acronym VGIC, but we can get that detail to you all. The Alliance for
Okay.
Transportation Electrification is another organization that we're a part of that is also doing some interoperability engagements as well. So we can get that as a follow-up to you all.
Thank you. That's helpful. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Eliza. Okay, I've got Quinn up next, and then Dennis after that. Quinn.
Hi, Quinn Weber with Washington UTC. Do we know what level of charger customers need for something like V2X or V2B? And then do we have an idea of like what percentage of PSE service territory has vehicles that can do this, and what PSE assumes the ramp rate on this might be?
So great question. So there's two different applications. You have the DCFC fast chargers that are what we are implementing for our school bus. So, obviously larger duty cycle vehicles will use that, and that's usually going to be the vehicle to grid application. For homes, it's a level 2 charger. Again, that it also requires some additional hardware on the back end, usually a black start generator and other capabilities. So there's both those applications. As to your second question, as far as analysis of our existing sort of I would say vehicle capabilities within our service territory, we're completing that analysis. And so we anticipate knowing a bit more about the level of vehicles that might be available in our service territory. So that's part of the work that we need to do is analysis of the vehicles that are available, also those that are bidirectional capable, the types of chargers that are available for that, and then really understanding, again, more specifically like battery state of charge, availability, customer sort of capacity constraints, and that will really help us get to a more modeled understanding of what is the potential capacity that we can leverage. So some of that work will be happening alongside of our actual technical demonstrations.
Great. And to follow up on that, so my understanding is a DC fast charger is probably not going to go in a residential home. Would that be more the case for like a larger building to have?
It can be, yes. So that, for example, we are installing DC flash chargers at our fleet facilities. It just allows us, especially with a fleet, normally they want to have a ability, but not for a residential home. Correct.
All right. And is PSE looking into what the distribution amongst its customers might be in the future? So I think it would be nice not to run into the same problem as net metering, where the distribution of benefits goes to early adopters, and early adopters are typically people for whom that can afford that.
Yeah, again, I think that will be part of our conversation as we assess the impact evaluation.
Great. Thank you, Malcolm.
Thanks, Quinn. And Dennis, I saw your hand up earlier. Do you still have a question?
I do. Has there been any thought to using V2H to apartment buildings or lower income qualified homes?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is, again, something that we're going to be assessing, Dennis. And one of the things that we understand is especially, those folks that experience outages, being able to leverage that resource is a significant benefit. It reduces, lost, food, for example, in the case of an outage. So those are something that we definitely are going to be able to assess.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis. And then I had a question in the chat from Ezra related. Why would it need black start capability? Isn't this mostly for peak shaving?
Well, it just depends on, normally, again, the technology is evolving, but many of the early applications for vehicle to home have a black start capability. For the instance of, an outage, they have to be able to quickly get the capacity back to the home. But we, again, are going through technical review of the various OEMs out there, and we can share some of that data as well.
I guess I understand that, but it seems to me that that's something that the homeowner should pay for if they're worried about it, using it as a backup generator. If the utility is doing it, it should be for public benefits, which seems like would not necessarily include black. I don't think you're going to be restarting the grid based on somebody's, Prius. So.
Understood. Yeah, understood. Thank you, Ezra.
Thanks.
Okay. Not seeing other hands up yet or things in the chat. We do have a bit more time if people have more questions. Let's give you all a few moments to think. Okay. All right. Well, then I think we can keep moving, Malcolm. Just want to thank you so much for being here, available to present and answer questions. And yeah, I'm sure we'll hear more as time goes by on this exciting topic. So we can keep moving with our agenda. Thanks, Malcolm. Okay, next slide. Okay, so next up, we are going to talk about energy efficiency and demand response. We've got Casey Curtis and Tom Smith, both from PSE, here to chat with all of you. And with that, let me just make sure, yep, Casey's on and I see, okay, perfect. So Casey, I think you're gonna be kicking us off. Okay.
Yes.
So feel free to take it on. Thanks, Casey.
Great. Thank you, Annie. Thanks. So today we're going to take you through the analysis that we developed for the ISP and the demand forecast. For those of you who attend RPAG regularly, much of this material will be a repeat of what you saw in the March RPAG meeting when I was representing the blue Tetris bar. But we're going to give you a refresher and talk about load impacts. I'll discuss conservation, and then my colleague Tom will discuss demand response. Next slide. So the ISP required conservation to do several new things. I'm going to sort of set the stage here. We have to plan far beyond our normal 2-year biennial periods. We have to develop scenarios and sensitivities. And of course, the Decarbonization Act sets an ambitious conservation goal of 2% of annual load, which is roughly double our current level of conservation. Next slide. So we're talking today about the customer strategy, which is part of the ISP plan that will incorporate the 20-year forecast for each of PSE's customer programs. It'll include customer energy management, conservation and demand response programs, as well as our department customer energy innovations, DSR programs such as solar, battery storage, and transportation, which you just heard about from Malcolm. Next slide. So one of the important things to know, and this is going to get a little process discussion, but it's important, about the ISP is how it differs from the way that conservation develops its energy efficiency targets under existing law. This diagram outlines the traditional method at the top, which is we're still using because the existing law hasn't gone away. It's still in effect. In the bottom, kind of the way that we plan under the ISP. Under the traditional method set by the Washington State's Energy Independence Act, our conservation targets are the output of load forecasting and integrated resource planning process. So under the Act, qualifying utilities have to achieve all cost-effective conservation. And what's considered cost-effective is the result of a conservation potential assessment, as well as the IRP that selects the quantity of conservation based on levelized cost and how it compares to other resources as we build our supply curves. After the IRP selects the cost-effective conservation, then our conservation target, is the 2-year pro rata of the full 10-year potential. Now, in the second row, the ISP, there's no need for any of that because the Decarbonization Act itself sets the target, 2% of annual load, or as much as is considered commercially and technically feasible. So now we in conservation need to develop the future efficiency levels and provide it to load forecast and IRP. Which means instead of coming up with the target at the end of this very long process, we have to develop it right at the very beginning. So in PSE's ISP development timeline that we developed after the law was passed, that meant we need to come up with our baseline 20-year plan or a reference case by February 1st of this year, which was well before any draft rules were out that could tell us, for instance, what commercially feasible meant and that kind of thing. So we had to get that done then. So what we did was we did some internal program planning. We looked at our current program's growth potential, likely conservation trajectory. We came up with a 5-year plan without the sort of benefit of the year-long biennial planning process that we're undertaking right now for the 26-27 biennium. And then we did kind of an accelerated CPA using a lot of the assumptions that we included in the 2025 CPA with some changes. Next slide, please. These are a bit wonky, and you're welcome to ask if you'd like more details, but basically we incorporated that 5-year planning exercise into the CPA's adoption curve, if you will, so that the model can project out our current programs out 20 years, but also show the full achievable technical potential so that we can better understand what the future looks like, as well as what we need to do to expand our program's reach towards that 2% goal. So we'll first look at the 20-year projection of our current program potential. Next slide, please. You might call this graph sort of the business as usual case. It represents our likely program potential given our program's offering, which is shown in the orange bars with the blue top. The dark blue represents PSE share of NEA's conservation programs. The dotted blue line represents our average conservation achievement over the last 10 years. And then the orange line at the top represents 2% of PSE's annual load based on the current load projections. Now in the orange bars, there's a noticeable dip in 2029, and that represents the implementation of Washington State's law prohibiting mercury-containing lamps. When a policy like that happens, it's a good thing, but it raises the baseline from which our programs can claim savings. So for example, we won't be able to incentivize customers to switch from mercury vapor lamps to more efficient LED high bay fixtures if the mercury vapor lamps are no longer an option and LEDs are all they can buy. So new codes and standards tend to reduce our conservation potential over time like this. So this is the growth path based on what would be expected to produce if with our current measure offerings based on current laws. So what we understand to be, again, at the time of without an established definition, to be kind of commercially feasible. Next slide.
And hey, Casey, just one sec.
Yes.
We've got a question from Quinn.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that. Go ahead.
No worries.
Hi, Casey. Could you go back to the timeline slide for me?
Yeah. One more. That one. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yes. I am a little confused on why, given that the goal is 2% of load for conservation, the rationale for doing the CPA before knowing what the load might be.
The CPA, so in the Decarbonization Act, there's still a reference to the CPA. So it still is supposed to inform our, the potential. It's kind of going to give us the technical achievable potential from the CPA. I was just about to describe that, but it's going to give us our horizon of what's considered technically achievable, or no, technically feasible, I believe is the language in the law. And so it's what we use to kind of like help us plan out 20 years as well, because our programs have pretty good insight into what the next 5 years are going to look like based on what we know about our customers, about our vendors, and all that. 10 years out, it's pretty fuzzy, and 20 years out, it's very fuzzy. So we use the CPA to sort of help develop the further out horizon, if that makes sense. I hope I'm answering your question, Quinn.
I think you did. I'm still a little confused, but maybe as you go on, I'll get some clarity.
Okay, yeah. Lauren, you had a question?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and maybe you're getting to this. How does this methodology, or does this methodology enable the utility to select more conservation as a distribution system resource?
How does this process allow us to select more conservation as a distribution system resource?
Yeah, so if you're seeing like constraints on your distribution system, like you need to upgrade a substation in order to meet load in a specific load pocket or something,
Right.
Does this methodology allow for that kind of, granular
Right.
non-wire solutions to distribution system investments?
Yes and no. There are certain things that we can get from the CPA, like average household equipment, things like that, certain things we can derive from it. But when we're talking about the NWA analysis, it's sort of a different animal. It's very sort of location specific. So this is really about how we're trying to develop the overall conservation target, right? So Decarbonization Act says 2%, and we say, okay, holy cow, how do we do that? And so it's really about trying to figure that out, than it is about identifying specific areas in the system that could use NWA type analysis.
And so when does that NWA analysis happen in the ISP process?
Yeah, that's a good question. I believe it's undergoing right now. I don't know if any of my colleagues could tell me better, but I know we're doing non-pipe alternative analysis now. And I'm trying to remember what the specific locational requirements are for. So I guess it's hard for me to say specifically, other than I know it's going on right now, and unfortunately we don't have the folks here that I'm aware of that can speak to it more.
Hey, Casey, can I interject real quick? I do
Yes,
have
yes.
Philip saying he can help.
Oh, okay, great, excellent.
Yeah, so I think there, Lauren, thank you for that question. I think that we still will be looking when the delivery system planners are looking into the delivery side, both electric and gas. They are still doing the non-wires analysis and the non-pipes analysis. So it's still being captured through theirs. So imagine if it doesn't get caught in the peanut butter when you do the crunchy peanut butter, they'll be catching it in that space. Does that make sense?
Crunchy peanut butter. Okay. I look forward to learning more about that as we get further in the process. Thanks, Philip.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you, Philip.
Any other questions before we keep going? Okay, Casey, and Jack, you probably could go forward a few more slides.
Yeah, let's go back to, let's do one more. Yeah, there we go. Perfect. So pick it up. Let's talk about technical feasibility. So technical feasibility, we have a pretty good basis for, because that's the achievable technical potential from CPA, as I mentioned. And that's what you see in the light blue bars here. The achievable technical potential includes conservation measures that PSE offers. It includes measures we don't offer, like office equipment or efficient laptops, things that we've had a tough time developing into cost-effective programs in the past. It includes potential with residents that haven't participated in our programs because they just can't get past the first cost barrier. It would include landlord tenants. It would include basically all customer segments that have barriers of whatever kind to their participation. I'll note that the full achievable technical potential includes things that are not cost effective, and we wouldn't typically consider using them or consider them economic in an IRP resource selection models. But they are part of the potential, which means that somewhere between the top of the technical potential, the light blue bars, and the bottom of those light blue bars, somewhere in there is going to be a point where we have to start considering what's going to be our impact to ratepayers, right? Because we're going to get into more expensive types of conservation. And we're going to talk about these elements more in our integrated system plan. We're running conservation scenarios and developing ways of estimating the cost of different ways to expand our programs. And I think the latest draft rules that we just got 2-3 weeks ago or something like that will help add further clarity to how we expand our programs without negatively affecting affordability and spending ratepayer money responsibly. And I see there's a question. Annie, is that from Megan?
Yep, Megan, you're up.
Hello.
Hi. Yeah, so it makes sense to me that codes and standards would reduce some of that potential for savings. But I'm curious about other large loads coming onto the system from EVs and data centers. Have savings from those electric loads been accounted for in this analysis?
Savings from electric, yes, to the extent that we kind of know what the potential is at this point, right? So data centers coming online we do have a telecommunications program that we just started a year or two ago where we're exploring the efficiency at data centers. EVs right now, EVs are kind of light on conservation, frankly. They're an added load, but there's not a ton of opportunity there for conservation. We do have more efficient chargers that we incentivize, but as EV load growth continues in the future, and on this bar, I should say, most of the rise of that is in EVs. It's if you take EVs out, it's relatively flat. And that represents a large load that's coming onto our system that frankly, right now, given technologies that we know today, not a lot of conservation potential there. So there's not much we can touch with them.
Thank you.
Lisa?
Maybe I missed this, but if you got to meet conservation requirement that's 2% of annual load and your technical achievable potential, which you wouldn't even, get all of that, right? Because it's not economic.
Right.
How do we deal with this disconnect? It's just like
So no, that's a great question. So what the Decarbonization Act says is 2% of annual load. That says the Utility Commission may accept a lower number if 2% is not found commercially or technically feasible. Right.
Okay, that's what I was.
Technically feasible was we kind of agreed early that represents the technical achievable potential from the CPA, and as you can see, obviously, even that maximum technical. The 2% just isn't there. Now, things change in the future. This is our first cut at this. Things can change. You never know. But this lines up with kind of what we understand to be the kind of the range of options within the industry, I think. So the technical achievable analysis wasn't a surprise to us necessarily. Commercially feasible was the big question. And I think we're just landing now on draft language in the latest rules that gives us sort of guidance of what might end up being commercially feasible. I think it's going to end up being somewhere between, that where the top of the orange and dark blue bars are, which represents our current program pathway, and the top of the technical potential. That commercially feasible is going to be somewhere in there, and we're working through the definitions of what we have now and figuring that out.
So I want to ask a second question because part of it I think will get answered in the demand response section, but part of it relates to energy conservation also reduces peak demand.
Yes.
So so my question is, what % of total demand savings will any measure, whether it's conservation or DR, what % of total demand savings will EV, conservation, demand, and resources represent? And how does it compare to their share of projected growth in peak demand? Because I think, it is a huge jump.
I think Lauren Melander, when she talks about load forecast, is going to get into that. So I think if it's okay, I'll defer that question. If we don't get around to it, I can come back. But I think she's going to be better prepared to talk about specifically their load impacts and how we measure that. Is that all right if I defer that?
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to tee it up because I don't want to forget that conservation measures also reduce peak demand. So it's not like a completely separate topic.
Sure. Sounds great.
There's maybe not that much you can do for conservation on EVs. I'm not an expert in that area.
Okay. Understood. There's Lisa.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm a little slow on these buttons. I was going to try to get off on camera again. This technical, all achievable technical potential, and the orange bars and the blue bars, right? Electric savings. You said at the beginning they're based on the levelized cost comparison. Cost effectiveness, or are these also taking into, I just was curious, what's cost effective, because Lisa brought up the reduction of peak. I assume that also takes into account the peak reduction as well as the energy reduction. That's maybe my clarifying question.
Yes. So to the last part of the question, the value that energy efficiency measures deliver on peak is part of how we assess the benefits of energy efficiency. And so most of the monetized savings, if you will result from the kilowatt hours. But there is, based on its load shapes, we can estimate a certain percentage of that savings will occur on peak, and that gives us a value for capacity, for capacity savings. So you mentioned the cost effectiveness. So what you're seeing with the technical potential, if you take the program plus the technical potential, the highest part of our analysis or of our total potential, this is independent of any cost effectiveness analysis. Okay, through our traditional EIA target setting process, the IRP will select the amount of conservation that is cost effective based on levelized cost, because that's how you compare conservation to wind and solar and all the other energy generation resources. So they'll compare it that way. And then when we deliver conservation programs, we have to deliver them they have to be cost effective according to the total resource cost test, which Washington State is a Washington State regulation. And that TRC test basically says, is this measure paying for itself? Are ratepayers getting a good deal because the benefits from these measures pay for themselves over the life of them? So the bars that you're seeing now doesn't really represent any kind of cost effectiveness screening. What I was mentioning is that now that we have sort of a definition of commercially feasible, which is the language used in the Decarbonization Act, that will sort of help inform, it's sort of a balance, I think, between cost effectiveness and the burden on ratepayers, because all of this conservation has to get paid for on the conservation tariff. So we can't just double or triple the conservation tariff and expect everyone to be happy about it, right? There's a reasonableness cost test there that we're going to employ that we haven't done now because the language is kind of new and we just haven't figured that part out yet.
But I think what I was understanding, the orange and the darker blue were based on some cost-effective screening. It was just the lighter blue, or is this you're kind of starting again?
Right. So the orange and the dark blue represent what our program. So it's for the first 5 years of that is literally our programs. Like we were asked, based on everything you know today, what do you think the next 5 years looks like? Is it up? Is it down? Is it going to be cost effective? Are you losing any kind of savings on anything? So it's that. Then we use the CPA and we sort of map that to the longer term projection that the CPA provides. And we said, okay, that same set of program measures that we currently offer, what is that going to look like over time? And so that gave us what, like I said, I mentioned, I think it was called our business as usual scenario. So that's what you're seeing in the orange and the blue. So if we're going to, obviously a declining glide path is not what anybody wants to see. So in order to, it doesn't look like 2% is going to be achievable at this point, but we want to see growth. And so it's going to be somewhere in between those lower bars and the upper light blue bar, if that makes sense.
I think so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. I think there's only one more slide I have before I turn it over to Tom. Shall we go there? There's no other questions?
No other questions. Go ahead.
Okay, this one's a lot to look at, but you'll have copies of the slides if you want to dig into it. Basically, the measures here shown on these charts represent the 25 electric and gas conservation measures that are expected to deliver the most conservation savings over the next 20 years. So they would be the biggest contributor to that technical potential. Also on this chart is the measure's growth rate in the CPA, or in other words, whether the measure's conservation growth potential will be high, medium, or low growth, or negative growth, in which case the savings is actually potentially is declining over time. So this is just something for reference. So somebody thought it would be a good idea to include this for curiosity's sake. Quinn, you have another question?
I do. Thanks, Casey. I'm curious with regard to sort of how growth rate was determined on this graph, if that takes into account the idea that PSE, due to the Decarbonization Act, won't be offering incentives or rebates on gas EE measures.
Yes, it does. It does take that into account. That's why most of the things that you see there are relatively low, negative or no growth on the gas side. The measures that you see that are high growth, include a couple weatherization measures, which, even though we can't fund gas equipment, weatherization is not going to go away. Thermostats, which are going to be not only a good conservation measure, but are integral to sort of our combined co-deployment with the demand response. And furnace tune-ups. I don't actually know why that one is shown as high. I'd have to look into that. But all the rest are essentially low or medium or negative growth. Anything else? Okay.
There is a question in the chat. So see, just going back up. Why is growth rate of HPWH projected to be negative?
Heat pump water heaters,
Heat pump water heater.
Yeah, tier 3 and 4. Why is that? That's a good question. I don't actually know. What I will do is I'll try and find out while the rest of this RPAG meeting is going on and see if I can't post an answer in the chat. Otherwise, I may have to get back to you. I'll have to dig into that measure and see exactly what's happening there.
Okay.
It's the growth rates are based on a simple formula of like differences over time, year to year. So there may be something that sometimes there's assumptions in the CPA that like a lot of the discretionary measures are taken up in the first 10 years. And then after that, it's not assumed to be much adoption at all. This might be, I don't know this, but it might be one of the measures. And if it is, that's an easy explanation, because then it would just show 10 years of growth and nothing after that. But I'll have to get back to you on that. Sorry, I don't know off the top of my head.
Thanks, Casey. And then a couple more questions in the chat from Froylan. What are the units of the EE measurable potential or measure potentials? Sorry.
Kilowatt hours. Well, actually I think I had to use megawatt hours on the previous slide. This is, okay, are we talking about this slide or?
Froylan?
I should have put.
Yeah, I'm talking about that slide, and I'm just thinking natural gas is like a couple of orders of magnitude larger.
Right.
So I was just wondering if they have both the same units.
No, sorry, my apologies. I should have marked them on here. Therms is the unit for gas.
Okay.
And I'm pretty sure megawatt hours is the electric one. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Berlin. Okay. And then one more question, Casey, from Lisa. Are these tables economic potential?
These tables are, I believe that, oh, now I'm trying to remember. Is that economic potential? Yes, I believe these are economic potential. You know what? I'm going to apologies. Let me get back to you on that. That won't take me long to find out.
Okay.
I will put the answer in the chat.
Okay. Thanks, Casey.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for that question, Lisa.
If there are no others, I can turn it over to my colleague Tom, who can take you do some of the analysis on the demand response side.
Great.
Cool. Thanks, Casey. Hey, everybody. Good morning. My name is Tom Smith. I run PSE Flex, our demand response programs. Happy to be here with you this morning. So as you can see on this slide, based off of modeling exercises that have been underway, there's a little bit of a delta between where we are now and what our 10% peak target looks like based off projected growth and demand. The space between the yellow line here and the blue and green lines below it signify a pretty aggressive ramp up of demand response and demand flexibility programs that are necessary in order to achieve our goals and hit that 10% of peak target. Since August of 23, Puget Sound Energy has successfully launched a large portfolio of demand response programs, including Flex Smart for thermostats, Flex Rewards for customers without a device, Flex EV for customers with an electric vehicle or car that can communicate over Wi-Fi, more recently, Flex Batteries for customers with storage systems at home, and business demand response for customers ranging from large commercial loads to small to medium businesses. This has been a pretty rapid launch and scaling of demand response programs. And through that, since just a couple of Augusts ago, we've been able to achieve just over 86 megawatts of performance. However, as you can see, we do have a little bit of work to do. So with that, let's go on to the next slide and talk about the types of programs we're planning on rolling out in order to make all this happen. I really like this little box on the right here. As you can see, demonstrated there, modeling suggests that 10% of peak load is going to land around 615 megawatts in the winter and 560 megawatts in the summer by 2044. That's a lot. The table of programs you see here listed is what PSE plans on developing and continuing to grow over the next several years, but I'll stop because I see Quinn has his hand up.
Yeah. Hey, Quinn.
Hi, Tom. I'm curious to what extent PSE is considering rate structure, particularly time of use, within their demand response programs.
Yes, we are considering it, definitely. I don't want to get too deeply into details on the how and the when on that. But what I will say is absolutely yes, we're talking about it. Did I see another hand pop up briefly, or am I seeing things?
I haven't seen any.
Okay. Just imagining things then.
No worry. Keep
Quinn,
going if you want.
More details to come for sure. Yeah, so it's really important to recognize that in order to meet these pretty aggressive targets, PSE is going to have to leverage every single flexible load opportunity available, which means while the line items you just see here now are the current plan, teams at PSE are going to continue developing innovative new solutions to make sure that we get to where we need to be many years from now. In short, this list is going to continue to grow over the months and years as we identify additional feasible solutions to help manage our growing load demand. And we're actively pursuing some things that aren't necessarily detailed in the line items here, but we have significant belief that it will help add to our bottom line and make sure that we stay on track to meeting those targets. So I want to pause there. I'm sure a lot of people have questions about DR and what we're cooking over here. So maybe we can just open it up and folks who do have questions can start asking them.
I have a question about the DR. Oh, yeah. Lisa. Oh, okay. Maybe I'll go. Yeah. What kind of control signal are you thinking of sending to the at least for the water here? Is it just like a on and off, and then are you just trying to gather data to see how it will respond in aggregate or as a population of water heaters? What's your status in regard to that question?
So the fun answer is yes. And broadly speaking, we're investigating all the different types of controls and usage modulation methodologies that you could implement for an effective and scalable water heater demand response program. So you'll see that grid enabled and grid connected are both listed here, and those like kind of seem like you could boil it down to the same thing. But really what that means is when we're talking about grid enabled, it can be a fleet of water heaters that are a part of a more scheduled sort of load flex or load modeling plan, whereas grid connected could just be water heaters that are a part of like a classic DR, like you kind of referred to, on off. I'm going to use heavy air quotes there because we aren't turning the water heater off. We're just asking it to pause heating until the temperature drops to a certain degree, and then it kicks right back up. So we're not freezing people out or anything like that. So what I'll say right now is we're in the study phase. We recently launched Study Flex water heaters, and we're bringing in both CTA 2045 communication modules that communicate over cellular, and we're partnering with Rheem and another water heater manufacturer, TBD, or to be announced rather, towards the end of this year for Wi-Fi based controls. And we're being very intentional about using them to model DR dispatches in the grid connected application and the scheduled grid enabled use case that I gave you earlier. So we're truly looking at everything right now, and the intent is to have a well fleshed out study that can tell us which resources should be used where and how by, I want to say, end of Q2 next year.
All right. And is there just a quick follow-up, is there a reason why there's higher potential for the Wi-Fi rather than the adapter? Is the Wi-Fi just the newer wave of water heaters?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. So in the past, if we go into our Wayback Machine here, many studies came out kind of around the mid 2010s that said Wi-Fi wasn't a reliable way to communicate with water heaters, just because of where they are in the house. Sometimes they're in basements, sometimes they're as far away from all the places you actually use water for some reason. And that's why the CTA 2045 thing got a lot of speed and pickup, because it had that cellular option. So we didn't have to worry about, hey, someone changed their Wi-Fi password and now your resource is gone. Right? Kind of a big deal. What we've learned over the years is Wi-Fi has improved, and that's great. And the communicators that the tanks themselves have to receive a Wi-Fi signal and maintain connected have also been upgraded pretty significantly. So that's happening. And at the same time, way more manufacturers are starting to include that Wi-Fi capability inside the tank itself. So you're just going to get more tanks that have the potential to become a resource because of that than if you just relied on shipping a CTA 2045 module to a customer, walking them through installing it, getting it up, all that fun stuff. Does that kind of answer the question?
I think it does. Thank you. Yeah.
Cool. I see 3 hands. I don't know which order they came up in.
That's okay. That's what I can help you with. Okay, so we've
Cool.
got Lisa first, then Dennis is up next.
Right on. Hey, Lisa.
Yeah, I think this is really quick. So I'm really happy to see a good amount of demand response for electric vehicles. And I know that winter peak is still higher than summer peak, but summer peaks are unpredictable, thinking about the heat dome. And so I wonder how sort of your current load forecasting with respect to weather in the summer, how that's affecting or will affect maybe how much demand response you may want from electric vehicles in the future.
This could be a quick one. I could also make it a long one. But what I will say is, bluntly, we want everything and anything we can get when it comes to EV resources into the portfolio, right? So it's I don't want to say plan for the worst and hope for the best, but what we are doing is making sure that we're being aggressive about bringing in EV resources and programs so we can reach a lot of different types of customers and make sure that we aren't just trying to, push a bunch of customers into a single designed program that might not work for them, right? Or work for their car. So when it comes to the forecasting side of that, I'll ask that, I think I'll say what Casey said earlier, and I'll defer to the planning teams on that and then nod enthusiastically to what they say. But really the short answer is we're trying to build the biggest portfolio we possibly can so it can act effectively in both seasons, regardless of the dynamic conditions of like the summer weather we typically experience.
Yeah, so are you leaning more heavily towards winter because that's when you're going to need it more and you don't want to totally exhaust the number of events with customers and the duration and all that?
Yeah, so as far as I know, we're only biasing a little more heavily towards winter just because historically we do peak more in winter than in summer. And that's what we see right now, right? History will decide whether or not we were right about that. But if we go into our look backs and see typically comparing winter to summer back and forth with each other, winter always has more peaks than summer does. So we're basing it off of what we know. And, with modeling as it goes, as we learn more, we will shift our expectations. And that's why I was talking about wanting to make sure we bring in as many resources as possible that regardless of the seasonality of it, will still perform, right? Just in case, right? This is kind of why we're doing it, for the just in cases. Yeah.
Okay, so I've got 3 more questions and I know we're right at time right now. So we'll just we'll dig into our break time if that's okay with folks. So I've got Dennis up next and we've got Lauren and Eliza. So Dennis.
Hey, Dennis.
Hi. This is part of an observation and then a kind of a question. But a few years ago, we were in Palm Springs. We stayed down there for about a few weeks, and we were in rented an apartment there. And the weather, it was like in June, I think, and it was like up to about 112. And my phone kind of went off like with an Amber Alert, and it was the local utility saying, "Hey, we're reaching our peak, and can you turn your air conditioners off or reduce loads, for the next 3 hours." And I can't remember when it was, but it was obviously in real time. And I understand the automatic systems, working, in an integrated fashion is the end result. But as a bridge to that, do you have, any plans or ideas to use an actual direct communication linkage via cell phones to reduce loads, especially when you're running into almost into extremis?
Yes, awesome question. So right now we have 2 behavioral programs, right? Where it doesn't require a device to participate. You can just respond to a signal and reduce your energy usage during specified periods. The first is Flex Rewards, which is an incentivized behavioral opt-in program. And the second is Flex Events, which is an opt-out behavioral program that isn't incentivized right now. Now, I really like these programs because they do exactly what you're talking about, which is super important, especially if you don't have a device. It's like flashing in your face saying like, hey, thermostat, I'm turning down, right? So what happens is, depending on customer preferences, we'll give a phone call or a text message, sometimes both. If people have said, let her rip, I want to see it in both places. And it says, hey, Dennis, tomorrow we're forecasting peak demand. We'd really appreciate you helping out and contributing here. If you can, turn up your AC a little bit so it's not as cold, or maybe run your dishwasher at a different time. We'd really appreciate it. And it gives you tips on how to reduce your energy usage. So you can get those notifications through text or through email, depending on what your preferences are. So we're looking at growing that program so it's a little bit more intuitive and a little bit more rewarding for customers in the coming seasons. But I'm really excited to hear that you had a positive experience with that, because that's what we're driving towards, making sure there's a really thorough level of education for the recipients of messages that have calls to action like that.
Thanks for that, Dennis. Okay, we've got Lauren up, and then we'll close out with Aliza. Lauren.
Thanks. So first of all, I just want to say we're really encouraged to see what looks like a really robust and diverse demand response, potential list of programs. It's super exciting. Really glad to see Puget coming forward with this stuff, and that you are seeing the value in it. I think is great. One question that I had and specifically about the water heating demand response, we've been talking about and trying to get utilities in the region to develop programs for these CTA 2045 water heaters for a number of years, because they've been on the store shelves, right? Like and customers have been buying them, and they're presumably just sitting in their house, like not being used as a demand response resource. And so I'm curious if the potential that you guys are looking at includes like the legacy sort of stock of those that are already on the system, or if you're assuming that customers are going to have to buy a new water heater in order to sort of be included here.
Awesome. Yeah. If a customer has already purchased a CTA 2045 port that was made by one of our partner OEMs, then there should be no reason for them to have to buy another port. The communication protocols are the same, which is great. So there is a level of backwards compatibility there. If customers don't have a port and they want to participate and earn some money for doing their part. We did actually, as a part of this water heater study I referenced, spooled up a section in our PSE marketplace online where customers can get the device delivered to them pre-enrolled and activated in the program. So literally all they have to do is take it out of the packaging and plug it into their water heater, and they're done. And a couple of weeks later, they'll get a reward from us saying, thank you for participating. So the answer is yes, there will be backwards compatibility, and then by extension, we're really trying our best to make sure we're designing programs in a way where nobody gets left behind. So what we don't want to do is introduce a bunch of just like lost assets out there, because we proliferated the devices and then changed our minds. That would be horrible. Yeah.
Great. Cool. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, you bet. Good question.
Okay, and I think we just have Lauren. Or was that Lauren?
I think Aliza was next.
Okay, Aliza,
Lauren
sorry.
just had her.
Everybody's
Yeah,
hands are still up. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, I just I put it in the chat, but it was really around this CTA 2045 versus Wi-Fi. And you just reminded me, and I went back to look at some meeting notes that I had, then this goes back to 2023, but it sounded like this, I thought there was maybe a push more to make CTA 2045 more standard, because it was a more advanced command set than like Wi-Fi. Is that still true, or are things changing with Wi-Fi capability?
Yeah. I would say it certainly was totally true. Up until fairly recently, a lot of the conversations I've had with the major water heater manufacturers out there have finally recognized the value there is in load flexibility and having options for how you implement load flexibility with this resource, and have started including additional load shaping controls inside of their units. So you can issue specific commands saying, we're trying to achieve this load shape. So this specific code we're sending you means this thing, which is sort of the appeal of like not to name drop, but like the Skycentrics thing, right? Like they do CTA 2045. They've been saying for a long time they have the ability to issue a series of values that equal a series of commands about load up or super load up or total emergency shut off, like those sorts of things.
Right.
And what I've seen is OEMs have seen that, manufacturers have seen that and listened to utilities and recognize the value there. And now they're building that into their systems as well.
So it's independent of these communications protocols. What you're seeing is it's more built into the technology itself.
Yeah.
No longer just the CTA 2045 versus Wi-Fi, the connectivity, how it connects with it.
Right.
Huh. Okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's like a silver lining thing, it's that people are hearing us and listening and actually acting on it, which is nice.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it was a couple of years ago, so things can change.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Elisa, for those questions. And Dennis, I see your hand still up. Is that just from before? Okay, great. I'm gonna kind of rush us to close out this section if that's okay, Tom, just because we went ahead and burned through the break. So thank you so much, Tom. Thanks for your questions. If you have additional questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. But we are going to wrap up this portion so we can at least take a 5-minute break. I know we're behind schedule a little bit, but let's go ahead and break until 11:30, and then we can kick off the next section on gas and electric demand forecast. So we will see you in 5 minutes all. Thanks. All right, well, welcome back, everyone. Thanks for getting us through that quick break. And I know it's only 5 minutes, so hopefully you had a chance to grab something to eat to keep you occupied through the next hour and a half or so. We are going till 1 o'clock today, and you can go ahead and go to the next slide, Jack. Up next, we have the demand forecast, and we're going to be talking about gas and electric today. We've got Lauren, Chandita, and Stephanie, who are all going to be presenting. And first, I'm going to hand it over to Lauren Mullender that's going to kick us off.
Great, thank you. Yeah, as Annie said, I'm Lauren Mullender. I am the manager of the load forecasting and analysis group here at Puget Sound Energy. We've got Stephanie Price presenting here today on the electric load forecast, and we have Chandita Das presenting the gas forecast. And I would just like to take a moment and welcome Chandita to our group. She is new in her role as the lead of the gas forecast. She's been in our group for about 3 months now, so I would say she's still pretty much drinking from the fire hose, as they say. There's a lot of information that is coming at her, but she came from within Puget Sound Energy. She was originally responsible for the load research function in the rates department. So her background is perfect. She's all about usage trends, and we welcome her for the first time in an RPAG today. Next slide, please. Okay, so the objectives for our presentation is to review the demand forecast, key assumptions, and present results. And of course, we'd like to hear feedback on the assumptions and your thoughts on that. Next slide, please. Okay, so just as a brief overview, very basics, a little table setting for our presentation here today. The 2027 ISP demand forecast is our long-term load forecast. It's the 2026 through 2050 is the forecast period. There are component parts of the forecast that are typically produced in each forecast that we do. That includes customer growth, so how many customers are being added to the system each year, load or energy, and peaks. A few notes about the forecast. As Casey talked about in his presentation earlier, the forecast that we're showing you today do actually include the impacts of the demand side resources. So the amounts of demand side resources that Casey and Tom talked about, they were developed, as Casey mentioned, kind of earlier this year through a big project. It was a lot of work using the CPA as a base case or as the basis of what I would call the demand side resource forecast for us to include into the demand forecast here. The forecast that you'll see represent PSE's entire service area. That's typically how we do this presentation. And I would also mention that this is representing the base case or the reference case. We kind of use the term base and reference interchangeably throughout. This is, as Jen mentioned at the beginning of the presentation today, that again, it's base case. ISP scenarios are still under development. I do have a brief slide at the end of our section that we can talk about what that looks like at the moment. And then everything in this presentation is being compared to the 2023 Electric Progress Report, as well as the 2023 Gas Utility Integrated Resource Plan demand forecast. That's because that's the last published forecast that we have for the resource planning work streams. And we do show after DSR for those forecasts as well. Okay, next slide, please. So this is probably a slide I'm going to spend the most time on. It really provides a lot of background about the assumptions that you're going to hear about as Stephanie and Chandita talk about the results. So this is worth me just kind of going through each one of these assumptions in somewhat detail. And I'll start with building electrification. The base case essentially reflects the impacts of the policies consistent with HB 1589. We've heard a lot about HB 1589. The reason I'm bringing this up is because we've had I-2066 implemented or voted in, implemented, and then it's been deemed unconstitutional by the King County Superior Court. We are still waiting for a ruling from the Supreme Court of whether 2066 is in or out. And in the meantime, we are assuming everything consistent with HB 1589. And really what that boils down to for the demand forecast is what's that going to do to gas customer growth? What will that do to gas usage? And what would that do to electric usage? So you'll see some of those impacts later on in our results that Stephanie and Chandita show. We also, under the building electrification assumption, we do include some impacts of some small programs that are already underway. That is the electrification program that is it's sponsored or funded by Climate Commitment Act revenue, as well as the PSE targeted electrification pilot programs. Again, very small programs with a small impact, but we do include those here in the base case. Those are programs already planned and underway, and that's why they're in the base case. The other topic under building electrification is what we've been calling the natural rate of electrification, but it's essentially what we mean by that is what are customers doing without any incentives or programs? Are they electrifying their gas appliances and then moving away from gas and onto electric? We've started that analysis and continued to refine that. That's been updated here for our F25 or ISP load forecast. And you'll see that there's some impacts to that. Again, it's a very small impact, but nevertheless, we're continuing to study that and include it in the forecast. Okay, I'm going to move to customer growth. Customer growth, we look at housing permit forecasts for what the demand for new construction will be, and those permit forecasts indicate that we are still in a region that has a short supply of housing. So there's a lot of demand for home building in general. Gas customer growth specifically is under question around the various policies that are impacting customer decisions around implementing gas, meaning there's the PSE line extension policy that has gone away. The margin allowance was removed, so it's essentially more expensive for a customer to install gas or have a home built with gas. So what does that look like in this HB 1589 world? Are we going to expect gas customer growth? I will say the short answer is yes, but much smaller growth than what we've seen in the past due to these policies. And Chandita has a table that she'll be going through what each of the policies that we think kind of erodes the gas growth. But nevertheless, even though gas growth is forecasted to be low, we are assuming that there is going to be some gas growth. And I would say it's because we have been living in this HB 1589 space for some time, not a long time, but for some time. And there still is some small gas growth happening even in the environment in which we're in that is mostly discouraging gas connections. So, all right, and then transportation electrification. And I am guessing that there's questions about this stuff. And if I can just get through the slide and then we can kind of get to each of the questions when I'm done, that would be great. Transportation electrification. Okay, so Guidehouse did a 1-hour informational back in June. A lot of that is the transportation electrification or EV demand forecast is very complex, lots of use cases. We rely on Guidehouse to be our expert about that market. So they have done a presentation on June 18th to go through that. That is the demand forecast for EVs that we bolt onto our demand forecast in its entirety, and you'll see the impacts of what that looks like on energy and peaks on the electric side. We did kind of the highlight of that one is that typically the EV forecast is policy driven. And so the forecast basically it had assumed in the past that targets set for the state policy were all going to be met. Given current trajectories, however, we've backed off on the assumption that we would meet state targets for medium and heavy duty vehicles. The trajectory does not seem reasonable, that it does not look like the state will, or that the folks, manufacturers will meet those targets. So we've backed off and assumed that state will not meet those targets. However, we are still assuming that the market will meet the light duty targets from the state. So that's a little bit of a divergence from previous forecasts that you've seen from us, and that is that, again, we're kind of backing off of that one particular policy target. And of course, you know, the issue of the day is there's a lot going on with federal policy around EV adoption and infrastructure investments and tax credits and whatnot. We are still including the Guidehouse base case forecast that you saw on June 18th. And that is enough about EVs. Okay, so demand side resources. We just heard from Casey and Tom about energy efficiency and demand response. We thank them for their interesting presentation. What you'll see is how that looks in the load forecast, what kind of impact that has in total on the system. Again, there was a lot of work up front on the DSR, what I call DSR forecasts. Typically in an IRP environment, we would show you the forecast before the impacts of DSR, and then downstream from the demand forecast would be a number of analytics that ultimately decide the cost-effective amount of DSR. So we're excited that we'll be able to show you what those forecasts of DSR impacts are going to look like on the load forecast in our presentation. Climate change is another big topic. All the way back in the 2023 Electric Progress Report and Gas IRP, we had implemented climate change normals for the first time. And so there's a lot written about that methodology. We are still using the same methodology that we did back then. We've updated it for actual temperatures and whatnot. So it's been updated to fit into the model this time around. But again, the methodology is the same. We're using actuals and climate model data to incorporate a declining trend in temperature, in a warming trend, I should say, in temperatures. So warmer winters overall and hotter summers overall are being reflected in this load forecast. And then the last key assumption that I really want to touch on before we get to the results is about large load additions. We call them block loads, or this is where large loads like data centers or even EV fleets and other things like that would be considered. We call them out because typically our models looking at recent history would probably not pick up any big additions or big subtractions for that matter from the system. So we do look at large loads separately. And in the case of the base case, we're very conservative about what's in the pipeline in terms of connection requests. And there's, you know, anything from a very initial request, and there's stages all along the way of how a large load would progress up until connecting to the system. For the base case, we are being conservative and really only include the loads that have a very high probability of connecting. So that was my spiel. I assume that there are some questions.
Thanks for pausing, Lauren. Most of the questions, so all the questions in the chat, this is just a reminder for folks generally that Tom and Malcolm and Casey were responding to questions in the chat for folks that had questions from follow-up presentations earlier. So please see the chat if you want to see those. Haven't seen any new questions come in. Oh, there's one that popped in from Ezra. Okay, so we've got one from Ezra and then Quinn. So from Ezra, why is assuming fewer large loads conservative?
Yeah, and it depends on your point of view of using the word conservative. What we're doing in the base case is including those large loads that we have a certainty around connecting, and that's so that we don't, if we assume large loads that don't have a lot of certainty I mean, ultimately, the idea is that we may over forecast the load and then overbuild the system. So in this case, for base case reasons, we're including those that have certainty around connecting. Trying not to use the conservative word there.
Yeah, I mean, I just think conservative in general in planning means lower risk, which would mean you're assuming
Right.
higher load. So it seems to me that's sort of the opposite of what you're
Well,
talking
lower
about
risk
there.
in that, I mean, these forecasts are used for multiple reasons. If load doesn't materialize, are we at risk for not making prudent decisions?
Thank you.
Okay, next up I have Quinn.
Well, I've been saving a few questions actually. So I'm curious about like what kind of feedback you're hearing from the building community about like the expectation of gas customer growth.
Yeah. And I have a person who can jump on if she wants to, but I'll take a stab first. And then, yep, I see Emma. So Emma on the team, she has actually gone to some builder meetings. And Emma, I'll just let you answer that question and go for it.
Yeah. Hi, Quinn. I'm Emma Taylor Chapman. For the RPAG members who don't know me, I handle the customer forecast on the load forecasting team. And what I'm hearing from the building community is that they're heavily invested in including gas in the homes that they're building. That's their preference and what they believe their customers prefer. But that doesn't necessarily always mean gas home heating, space heating, and water heating. They're also pointing out the possibility that they add a bunch of homes that could be just low intensity end uses of gas. So cooking, outdoor fireplaces, indoor fireplaces, those things that preserve the gas luxury quality of living for their customers without having the full intensity. So they'd like to do all gas if they could, but these lower intensity options are also being heavily considered by the building community.
And is PSE talking to them about what their alternatives might be in that case? Or
I guess tough to say on the uniformity of alternatives. I have heard from at least 2 builders that say that they think that they can make things work within the updated building code to still include gas space heating. I'm not sure how realistic that is or how many homes will have that. But we know from our side of the data that we are seeing new builds come in with lower gas intensity usage, whether that means more efficient appliances, more efficient space heating, or whether it's just including the lower intensity end uses.
okay, that's all the questions I had about that particular topic. As for climate change, obviously, I think warming over time is probably a very safe assumption, but does that include the non-linearity of the fact that you might have more intense periods where load is much higher, like longer duration heat dome events and longer duration cold snaps?
Yeah, Quinn, thanks for the question. The climate model data, so very in general, the idea was to represent warming over time, but the data that we get from the climate model data as well as our own actual data does still have extremes in there. So to the extent that the process of analysis, the varying work streams that look at loads in different ways will take into account the overall trends, such as in our forecast, as well as the extremes. That would show in the electric side, the extremes are basically, well, let me start over. On the electric demand forecast that we produce and we're showing here today, there's analysis of temperatures about what's the 1 in 2 peak temperature. That's not extreme, right? So downstream from our forecast here, there's the resource adequacy analysis, which does produce simulations of demand under different conditions, including the weather extremes. And one way that we get there is with the extremes that are showing up in actuals as well as the climate model data. So on the gas side, the peaks that you're going to see here today, the temperature that we're planning to is a 1 in 50 temperature. So it's actually, on the gas side, it is representing a much more extreme peak already, just with that analysis alone. So it's a 13-degree day, which is pretty extreme for the Northwest. And that was determined, the degree day, or the degrees was determined also by looking at that climate data and looking at what the 1 in 50 temperature is going to be. So there's a number of places that peaks and extremes show up. What you're going to see here today, especially on the electric side, is the 1 and 2. And resource adequacy is where I would say that we would really represent more of the what ifs on all the different extremes when it comes to weather.
Okay, and I have one last question, which is the large load additions. Is there some planning that would include large loads potentially coming in with some of their own generation, or is it assumed that PSE will have to service the whole load?
Yeah, I think it's a case-by-case basis of what we know about the large load requests. If someone's coming in and says, I want to connect to PSE's system, and that's what we're studying, and we have certainty that we are going to be the providers then of the energy, then that's what we'll include in the load forecast. If there's options for a customer to come in and supply their own, then of course we wouldn't include that in the demand forecast itself.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thanks, Quinn. Okay, we've got another question from Lauren.
Hi, Lauren. I'm struggling a little bit with how to think about this large load issue. I mean, I do think it's prudent and necessary to have to include, the best information that you guys have in your demand forecast, because obviously, if you're going to need to build out the system in order to serve these loads, like you want to know that sooner rather than later and start planning for it and all of that. I think what's challenging is that, because we're going to, hope that a lot of these large loads do not, or that they are, when it comes to like cost allocation, like they are paying their full cost of service, and we're not going to be like, allowing too much like cross subsidization of system investments. And so I'm just wondering about how you kind of bridge that gap between maybe some of the conclusions that come out of the planning process, looking at like overall cost of resources, et cetera. Like if these assumptions about large loads are sort of embedded in the planning assumptions, how do we parse that out in order to really understand like what we're doing for core customers and core services versus what Puget might need to do to serve these larger loads?
Yeah, I think that you hit the nail on the head with like the bigger, broader question about how any utility needs to handle these kinds of requests. And with our narrow scope here in this particular case, the demand forecast itself is like kind of agnostic to your question, right? The ISP scenarios, this is how I am thinking about how PSE is going to be learning and thinking through the issues that you're talking about. The ISP scenarios include the levers of what happens if we get larger load requests and they're real and we can actually bring them on, quickly and serve them. The whole ISP process should be looking at those scenarios and kind of determining the impacts in their area. What does that do for infrastructure? What does that do for energy supply? And ultimately down the road is how does that impact customers? And I think that's where a lot of kind of the policy questions and how do we appropriately allocate costs and what should that look like? Those kinds of issues I think will be brought up at that point. I would say I don't think that we're punting those issues in the ISP and only we'll start thinking about that there. I think this is a broader issue that PSE is already talking across all the many groups impacted about how exactly should we be handling these large load requests. So it's kind of TBD and definitely an issue for sure.
Thanks, Lauren. All right. Well, Lauren, I think that gets us through your section. Okay, so great. And I know we're just trying to keep us on track because we've got lots of slides to go. So anything else before we wrap up this part? Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you so much, Lauren, and thank you for your questions, folks. I think we're going to move into the electric results next. Lauren, is that you, or are we passing that off to Stephanie?
I will pass it off to Stephanie.
Great.
Thank you.
Stephanie, over to you. And you can go to the next slide. Perfect. Thanks.
Okay. Hi, I'm Stephanie Price. I lead the electric load forecast. So next slide. Okay, here we have customer growth. This is a comparison of the previous 2023 EPR forecast and the current 2027 ISP forecast. On the left-hand side, we have total PSE customer growth over time. In black, we have actual observations. In gray, we have the previous 23 EPR forecast. And in teal, we have the current 2027 ISP forecast. As of year-end 2024, PSE had around 1.25 million customers, and around 88% of those, or 1.1 million, were residential. Overall, as you can see, the 2027 ISP forecast is lower than the 23 EPR. We added less customers than forecasted 3 years ago, and we expect more modest growth over time. Ultimately, this is about a 1.1% annual average growth rate per year. This means over the next 10 years, we expect our customer base to grow by around 140,000 customers, and in 20 years by around 270,000 customers. Okay, next slide. Here we have the 27 ISP load forecast. On the colorful stack chart to the left, we have the major components of the forecast, starting from now out to 2050. On the right-hand side, we have various rates of growth and the breakdown of the forecast and its component parts. Currently, PSE's annual load is around 2,600 average megawatts, assuming normal weather. Over the coming years, we expect energy demand to grow to over 4,300 average megawatts before demand-side resources. That is, adding up all of those slices together, you get to 4,300 in 2050. Load is composed of current customer usage plus growth driven by customers joining the system, electrifying buildings, and charging more electric vehicles. As a result of demand-side resources, aka the green and purple slices above the black line, expected demand is reduced. That is, in the absence of demand-side resources, that is, codes and standards, energy efficiency, and solar, the forecast would be higher. These resources reduce demand to around 3,600 average megawatts in 2050. So putting it all together, in the next 20 years, net load growth is about 900 average megawatts, or approximately 1.2% average annual per year in the near term, and 1.5% per year in the long term. In the absence of building and vehicle electrification, load would be flat. In 2030, we forecast that around 6% of total load will be due to EV charging and 1% due to building electrification. And when I say building electrification, I mean both PSE programs, a natural rate of gas conversions, and impacts from Washington's residential building code. By 2045, we forecast that around a quarter of PSE's energy demand will be from electrification impacts. And that means EVs and building electrification.
And hey, Stephanie, there is a couple questions in the chat, if that's okay. Is that okay to read those out? Okay. So from Ezra, there's a question about, does this include new large loads?
Okay, so the large loads included are as Lauren described. We have our major transportation projects that you see in the newspaper, as well as some discrete large projects being added. We are not including hundreds of megawatts due to data centers. Those will be handled as part of the scenarios. So the answer to that question is yes, there are some large loads in here, but there are not fundamentally loads that change the profile of PSE system. None of those have gone to the point of certainty, as Lauren described, or are certain enough to include in the forecast just yet.
Okay. And hey, Stephanie,
it's not zero data centers. So there are different types of data centers. There are data centers owned by companies, they call them enterprise data centers. So like Microsoft and Amazon, all these big companies around here, they have their own data centers on-prem or off-prem in the region. And then there are other types of data centers where they are providing services for other companies to process stuff. The data centers that we are baked into the forecast are more like the types that support enterprise services. We are not including large data centers like in excess of 30, 50 megawatts that supply or that provide data center services to third-party customers. So it's not true that there are zero data centers included in the large loads that are added. It's just we are not including ones that are gigantic and speculative.
Thanks for answering those. And I don't see other questions yet, so I think you're good.
Okay, let's go to the next slide.
Oh, one more question. Sorry, just popped in from Froylan. And are those included in the non-residential wedge?
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay, next slide. Okay, here we have a
I'm sorry,
comparison.
can I ask one more question on the previous slide?
Yes.
I'm sorry. On the electric vehicle, is that, as we've sort of treated it in the past, before any kind of managed charging? Like there's so like, you know what I mean?
Managed charging will impact peak, and I will describe that when I talk about the peak forecast.
Okay, thanks. That's a good point.
Okay, next slide. All right, so here we have the 27 ISP forecast in comparison to the 2023 EPR forecast. This is the same thing that we showed on the last slide. On the left-hand side in black, we have the observed average actual megawatts, average megawatts on a weather normalized basis. In gray, we have the 23 EPR, and in teal, we have the 27 ISP. We now forecast more load growth than in the 23 EPR. We expect load to grow on average around 1.2% per year in the short term and 1.5% in the long term. The major reasons for the difference in the forecasts are higher electric vehicle forecasts and less demand side resources, as well as a bit of higher observed customer usage to start. Right. Next slide.
And hey, Stephanie, there was one follow-up question for you on the data centers.
Mm-hmm.
I'll read it out loud from Lauren. It would be good to better understand what criteria you are using to assess which data centers to include. I'm not sure I understand the distinction, if it's just based on who owns the data center or what it's used for.
No, it is. It's not based on those items I described. I was trying to make the distinction between the types of data centers that are very large and not are likely to be shopping around for places to site their services, and the more certain types of data centers that are likely to go forward. We can take that for the feedback form to describe our methodology for including our large loads in the forecast.
Sounds good. Thanks, Stephanie.
Okay, let's move on to peak. All right, here we have the winter peak forecast, its components and growth rates. Oh, okay, I think we've, did we go back one? Okay, sorry, I skipped a slide. All right, here we have the winter peak forecast and its components. This is forecast on a weather normalized basis, aka 28 degrees on a weekday, non-holiday in December. This is the 1 and 2. Currently, that's around 4,600 megawatts. We use this as our forecasting starting point. Over the next 20 years, we expect customer growth, building and vehicle electrification to grow, and winter peak demand to be over 7,000 megawatts by 2050. So that is all the slices stacked up. However, as a result of those things in green, demand side resources, which includes demand response, energy efficiency, and more stringent building codes and standards, the peak forecast ends up at just about 6,000 megawatts by 2045. That's around 1,500 megawatts of growth in the next 20 years. Overall, the rate of peak growth is largely determined by EV charging growth. The peak forecast assumes that around 20% of peak demand in 2045 will be attributed to EVs. So please note that the demand response shown here includes both EV management programs, TOU, and other event-based demand response programs. So Lisa was asking about what proportion of demand response is related to EVs. And by the late 2040s, around maybe, I want to say 45% of the demand response shown here is attributed to EV management. That being both management induced by time of use rates as well as event-based programs. Over time, demand response, energy efficiency, and codes and standards are material. They reduce the forecast by 2045 by around almost 14%. Okay, next slide. Here we have a comparison of the 23 EPR forecast versus the 27 ISP forecast. The two forecasts are very similar pre-2030, but slightly higher in the long term. The higher long-term forecast is due to higher expected EV peaks, less energy efficiency and codes and standards in comparison to found in the 23 EPR. So overall, the peak forecast is not as dramatically different as load, but still higher. And that concludes my slides. If we would like to pause for questions.
Sure, thanks, Stephanie. All right, any other questions from folks? I know we got to some as we went.
I have a question. In the previous slide for the peak, for the winter peak, you have a note that says winter peak at 28 degree, I'm assuming.
Mm-hmm.
Is that sort of correspond to what Lauren was talking about, which is sort of thinking about the extreme cold event? What kind of I guess how extreme is that model?
So as part of the 2023 APR, we went through the exercise of developing the climate change normals for both degree days, which goes into load, and peak temperature. In order to determine what we thought was normal, we established a 30-year rolling window to marry both historical actuals and forward-looking temperature data provided by the Northwest Power and Conservation Council. The way we got to the peak temperature is we looked at, for a given year, during peak times, what was the coldest temperature within a season and the warmest temperature, or the coldest temperature within the winter season and the warmest temperature within the summer season. We then pooled all of these observations together to get a kind of a population sample. And then we found the 1 and 2, aka the P50, of all of these potential peak events as shown by these temperature data sets. So what this is saying is that in a particular season, giving our defined 30-year sliding window of actual observations and the climate change data provided by the council, pretty consistently it worked out that the midpoint was 28 degrees. So that does not mean that we are going to experience a peak at 28 degrees every winter. It means that there is a 50% probability any winter that you will experience a peak higher or lower. This is a long-established methodology for determining what you should forecast your peak at. So we're not doing anything particularly new or different there. The ways to deal with extremes are, like Lauren said, in the resource adequacy work stream, they are evaluating different temperature series that will have extreme events in it that kind of get at the gauge of like how we do, what climate change could look like with a like extreme heat event or extreme cold event. Is that your question?
I think so. Thank you.
And then Lauren has a question.
I'm gonna hold it, actually. It's not really, thank you.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Okay, well, I'd like to pass it on to Chandita then.
And
good afternoon.
Oh, sorry, Chandita, sorry to interrupt you, but Dennis, did you have a last question before we keep moving?
Yes, just a quick one. Some of the models, climate change models, are showing an acceleration factor that obviously, accelerates that. Is that part of this model? I don't remember you saying anything like that.
So in the climate change data, we see warming in general increase over time. But when looking at the extreme events, it is consistent, which is why we've forecasted at 28 degrees. It used to be last round, we forecasted at 27 degrees and then stepped up this year to 28 degrees. So that was our, warming over time, but we've moved into the future. So we've taken the step up to be 28 degrees. In the summer peak model, we do have more steps up to go. We start at 94 degrees, and then sometime in the next few years, we step up to 95, and then eventually 96. And I think this is really consistent with the hallmark that I understand about climate change, and that there's a general warming trend over time, but you cannot discount that extremes would go away because of that. In fact, they might get more extreme, which I understand is motivating your guys' queries about, well, what's happening in extreme events. But unfortunately, that's handled in the resource adequacy type work stream.
Thanks, Dennis, for that last question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So sorry for that false start, Chandida, but over to you to kick us off in the natural gas results.
No problem, Annie. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Lauren and Emma, for setting up the stage. Do you guys hear me well?
Yes, we do.
Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. My name is Chandita Das, and I will be going over the natural gas results. So before going into the results, I just wanted to go over these some policies and programs that Lauren already went over, but just I wanted to refresh them because these are the major drivers influencing our forecast. So the first, we have the Washington State Building Code, which making the end-use gas cost very cost prohibitive. So which acts as a disincentive for customers to have end-use gas in their new construction. The second thing that's influencing our forecast is the Seattle Building Emissions Performance Standards, which basically requires the commercials and multifamily buildings to adopt measures to become net zero by the end of 2040s. Then we have the PSE line extension allowances going away or went away this year. So making the cost of having new lines, gas line extension falls on the customer. Our forecast also takes account of the impact of the PSE decarb programs, which is small in magnitude, but it is accounted for. And the last thing we have is the electrification or gas conversion to electric without incentives. That is the customers who is converting to electric on their own. So we are kind of assessing how many customers are completely becoming from gas to electric and how many are just converting to electric partially. And that is accounted for through our modeling process. Next slide, please. So this shows our customer growth, which is our first steps in the forecasting process. The interpretation of the lines is similar what Stephanie explained. The left-hand side, we have weather normalized actuals. The gray is the, I'm comparing with the 2023 IRP. So gray is the 2023 IRP and teal is the 2027 ISP, which is our current forecast. So I want to mention that 2023 IRP lines that shows here. So 2020 IRP preferred portfolio was a no gas growth scenario. But here we have 2023 IRP is a gas growth scenario, which is compared with our 2027 ISP, where we also assuming a gas growth. As we already discussed previously, so what we have seen is that even with the policy discouraging new gas, we are seeing some gas customer growth still. In the last 5 years, we have seen about 25,000 customers enter our gas system. So it's on average about 1% growth. We are assuming this gas customer will continue to grow, but at a very moderate rate. So it is increasing, but a decreasing rate. So in the picture, it almost shows like flat, but it is not flat. It is growing in a very small rate. Like here, it shows like less than a 1.2 to 0.1%. At the very end of our forecasting horizon, so like after 2045, that's when we actually see the trend is becoming negative. That means more customers are leaving the system than they're coming into the system. So the net growth is negative. Next slide, please. So this shows our gas energy forecast composition. So this is all our firm gas customer, residential, commercial, industrial, and interruptible. So overall, we see a declining trend. If there was no demand side resources, the demand will be at the top of all this area chart. And if there is and with demand side resources, with the black dark line shows what the total demand is going to be. And we see overall a decreasing trend, which is with our small growth of customers, with demand side resources and overall warming temperatures all driving the smaller negative growth. As the table shows, on average, we expect the the demand to go down by about 0.4%, and in the 10-year period, about point. So I see a question that just came in.
Yeah, thanks, Chandita. I was going to just read that off for you.
Yes,
from
please.
Ezra. So does the forecast include the effect of increasing per unit cost as large commercial, et cetera, phase out gas?
Per unit cost. I just want to see the.
Right. I mean, I noticed toward 2045, you have basically on a previous slide, essentially full phase out of commercial and large residential gas. Unfortunately, this is the great quandary of gas, right? That you'll still have to maintain the entire distribution system if you don't phase off large areas or aggressively use non-pipes alternatives. So that increases the per unit cost, which presumably would incentivize those who can to accelerate their migration away from gas, the so-called death spiral.
Yeah, we talked about this impact of the cost. This is not directly included in our model yet. And Phillips can jump in and expand on this response.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Chandita, I think you were going exactly where I was going to go. And that is, this will be for this reference case, we'll have a starting point and we'll be able to do a much more detailed look at those kind of bill impacts, right? And then we can compare to the other scenarios. But this will be that opportunity to get that kind of longer term look to see how much is that going up, right? Based on these assumptions. So, it's not like it'd be great if everything were a set of simultaneous equations, but they're not. So we'll be able to look at what are those rate and bill impacts to different customer groups as a result of this analysis, right? And then we can take a look and say, oh, gosh, if rates are going up dramatically, maybe this load forecast is a little overly overstated. Maybe it's actually not going up as much as you think, right? So we'll get that look from this analysis, right? From not this analysis, everything that comes after it.
So this analysis would include, you would see what those price impacts were.
Right.
And then maybe you'd be able to assess what the impact would that be. I mean, certainly some people think that's going to be a very significant
Yes. Some people do. It will be interesting to see what it looks like.
I guess we'll find out.
Yeah.
Thanks, Philip and Janita.
Philip. Okay, so I think we talked about these slides about the composition of the gas forecast. So we can move on to our next slide, which compares our 2027 ISP energy forecast against the 2023 IRP forecast. As we have already discussed that the 2027 ISP has a much lower customer growth, so it is the demand is lower than 2023 IRP. There are certain things that will add to load, but like we do have some relatively larger loads that come in, commercial or industrial, so that will add to load. Some colder weather will add to load, but those are much smaller compared to the decreasing the trends or the factors that are having negative impact, which is the declining customers. And DSR will impact our load and help it to go down. And there are also some customers leaving the system, large customers. So all this together having an impact where our 2027 ISP demand is lower than 2023 IRP. Next slide. So now we are going to the peak gas demand. So it shows the compositions of the peak demand. Without DSR, it's pretty much flat, the peak forecast. Residential, we see declining at a very small rate, and commercial industrials is either flat or in a short term, it's a very slight increase, like 0.1%. And with DSR, we see it declining, which the table shows. So in the next 5 years, like almost flat, 0%, and the 10 years, like negative 2%. The share of residential and commercial industrials in the peak load, peak demand remains to be consistent across the time horizon. And as the time goes on, we have more percentage of DSR, which is energy efficiency and codes and standards. So that's our peak forecast. Next slide, please. So for the income, when you compare that with our 2023 peak IRP forecast, we see in the near term, like 10, 15 years horizon, when the 2020 IRP peak is actually lower than 2027 ISP peak. At the end of our forecast horizon, they kind of converge. So one thing is impacting this peak would be the DSR in 2023 IRP were higher, and then 2027 ISP. And there's another thing is also the last few years, we did have some much colder weather than some cold peak days compared to the previous years. And so when we update our models, it will take into account of the updated weather, and it will reset, will have a better starting point for our peak forecast. And so now we see for the near term, slightly larger peak than 2020 IRP. And that actually concludes my presentation. I'll pause for questions. I'll try to answer. If I can't, then Stephanie and Lauren will jump in, and Philip.
Thanks, Shajita. Hey, Lauren, question?
There's a question.
Yeah, and maybe this is what Ezra was getting at, but I'm just going to ask it in a little different way. I mean, does this forecast take into account the effect of, the need to purchase emissions allowances in Washington State for these customers? I mean, like, is there a price on carbon incorporated into this, and the price effect of that on gas demand?
I will try to answer a little bit, and then Lauren maybe can jump in. So we have some of this special program, the CCA program, those impacts are included in the model. I don't know if there are more, there are no more like explicit standards that are including.
No, I'm not talking about like Puget's programs. I'm talking about like the price of gas is going up.
Yeah.
Need to, buy allowances. And so does the demand forecast at all reflect the price effect and the consumer response to that price signal or not?
The rates are not explicitly included in the model. We expect some of these responses are captured through some of the DSR programs, but it's not explicitly included in our forecast model. So Lauren, she will elaborate.
Shandita, you were spot on. There is no effect of differing rates in the base case. I think where Philip was going with that is that as we examine responses to price, that is more in the extreme cases that we'll be examining in the scenarios. So we'll get some information there, but not in the base case. The rates are not relevant in the base case. But Philip, I can pass it on to you too.
Yeah, I think this kind of falls into that category of the importance of having an iterative look, you know, because everything that you just asked about, Lauren, is exactly the same stuff that'll be reflected in all of the subsequent analysis when we that I talked about with Ezra just a few minutes ago. You know, the demand elasticity for natural gas itself, it's very, very inelastic because you have a furnace in your house and it's cold and you're going to heat your house or you're not, right? I mean, so that's the reason why it's so inelastic. When you start talking about people switching, it then becomes a question of what are you switching to, right? So one of the nice things, I think, the really powerful things about doing an ISP the way we are is we'll be able to have this starting point, and then we'll be able to look at, given this starting point, what's happening to electric and gas rates individually, and then what's happening to the spread between them, right? So our electric rates going up faster than gas rates, that kind of thing. So I think there's going to be this iterative kind of approach to just double check and make sure that it all looks reasonable, but you can't look at one category at a time, right? You kind of have to look at all of it together.
There is another question, raise hand, Quinn.
Hi, yes, Quinn Weber with Washington Commission. I'm kind of piggybacking off Philip, in that would this then account for the fact that as people, in theory, electrify, and we'll say that builders have more like low intensity uses of gas or gas that can easily be converted, like would that not just change the elasticity of gas and cause either more or less usage?
Well, you just have to be careful because right, elasticity is a all else equal, right? So once you start making everything not equal, you're kind of deviating at that point. And that's why cross price elasticity to talk about gas versus electric doesn't quite work, because you have to change appliances, right? So that's kind of a violation. But when you're looking at when your furnace dies, what am I going to replace it with? So, you know, Quinn, I think that what we're going to be able to do is examine all of those components. And we haven't been seeing a big drop off in the gas customers. We haven't seen that yet. But as we examine this reference case scenario, and then we examine all of the other scenarios and possibly some of the sensitivities and things like that, we'll be able to see what all those impacts are, right? But we have to start so we can figure out what's looking reasonable, right? I mean, if this results in rates that seem totally unreasonable, then that's I don't know exactly what we do with that, but we'll work with y'all to figure out what to do.
Hey, Dennis, so you have a question?
Yes. With respect to new business buildings and new home builds, I would imagine that the industry, or the question is the industry ensuring that we have, you know, significant improvements in insulation and essentially reduction in energy usage? I guess if it's in the positive, then obviously, you know, our demand is going to be lower over time, and you know, that kind of still separates out existing structures. But are we seeing that?
And Philip, it looks like you're on mute.
So yeah, I'll just jump in real quick. So we do have those building codes are reflected. So new buildings are more efficient than old ones, right? Because they have to meet the new building codes. And then as appliances fall off, right, as they reach the end of their useful life, they're generally replaced with ones that are more efficient, because again, codes and standards, right? You're going out into the future. So yeah, I mean, and you can see the slide that Chandita showed that shows the declining, right? Customers are kind of treading water on customers, but usage is going down. Those are some of those effects.
I can have them raise their hands. I'll do that.
Thanks, Philip. Okay, other questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands up. So Chandita, thank you so much. And thank you all for your questions and conversation. I know we've got one more slide on next steps that Lauren's going to close us out on. So Lauren, over to you.
Hey, yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, just briefly, next steps. We've mentioned this a lot along the way in this presentation today about how ISP scenarios are currently under development. These pictures are just meant to be examples. There's really not, any type of final information in here, but just a reminder of the levers that when we create these load scenarios and show them later this year, there's the building electrification lever, there's the large load lever, and electric vehicles lever. So all of those pieces are in motion, and we have yet to bring them all together, but that's what we're working on next. And that concludes our presentation.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks, Lauren, for closing us out there. And thanks, everybody, for keeping us on track. We are a little bit ahead of schedule. If you all have questions, feel free to raise your hand, put them in the chat, or take yourself off mute. I see we have a couple up. And then meanwhile, we're also asking folks of part of the public to raise your hand if you'd like to provide public comment today, just so we know how much time to save for that. So I see one hand for public commenters. Great. And so if any other public commenters want to do that, just let us know by raising your hand. Okay, so first question is from Lauren, and then we'll go to Lisa.
Yeah, thanks. So I have a question that's not directly related to the material that was presented today, but I think is relevant to the work of the RPAG. And so I'm going to pose it, understanding that I might not get an answer today, but hopefully the PSE team can follow up. So, as we all know, the most recent federal legislation expired, the tax credits, which are, were in part going to benefit some of PSE's renewable projects to serve their customers. And I guess I'm curious to know what steps your team is taking to try to make sure that the projects that could still be eligible for those credits are going to be eligible. Is there a need to do, another kind of expedited procurement in order to access those tax credits under the timelines in which they're still available? Just kind of how are you guys thinking about that? Obviously, our interest is in trying to make sure that we can still capture whatever benefits we can, for customers to help maintain affordable bills and make sure that these projects don't kind of fall off just because those tax credits are going away. So just interested in hearing the team's thoughts on that situation.
Thanks for that question, Lauren. PSE, is that something you'd prefer to respond to in the feedback report, or how would you like to handle that today?
Oh, and I can provide a brief response. So this is the planning team, so they're focused on the development of ISP, but the acquisition teams are hard at work. We're in the process of trying to wrap up the 2024 all-source RFP, and we'll be issuing another all-source RFP later this year. At least that's the current plan, but we don't have any specific updates on any projects at this time.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks for the question, Lauren. Okay, and then Lisa.
Hey, I'm really curious about the large load scenarios that you're going to be doing. And we're not meeting next month. When would we see those scenarios? And can you give us like a 2-minute preview on how you're thinking about the scenarios?
Lauren, do you, yeah. Yeah. So, Lisa, I think that one of the things that we're that we're trying to pull together is looking at some information on like how many the megawatts and the customer requests, right? So there's a process, right? So none of these big, large loads become customers unless they go through the process that's been approved by the commission, right? So right now, what's going on is we'll have a large customer come and say, "Hey, I'd like to connect up to your system. I've got a 500 megawatt load. Can I hook up?" And we kind of come back to them and say, "Well, we're going to have to do a study. So you'll have to pay for the study, and then when the study's done, we'll tell you how long it's going to take to get that infrastructure in place, right? Which can be 5 to 7 years, depending on how big they are, right?" So what we're going to do, certainly for the ISP, I'm not 100% sure we're done with this by September, but what I would like to do is kind of look at a histogram of things like kicking the tires, right? So folks come and they say, "Hey, can I hook up? Can I hook up over here? Can I hook up over there?" And then you say, "Okay, well, we'll do a study for you," and they go away like, "Nah, I'm not actually interested." Right. So you can have a kind of a histogram of the number of customers and load size, but it's kind of by load size, by megawatts for tire kicks, and then what's in our study right now. Right. So to kind of show that contrast, and it's a stark contrast. It wasn't till relatively recently, I think January of this year, or maybe December of last year, January this year, is the first time we got a really big data center request, 1,000 megawatts. And they weren't, I don't think, very serious about actually building here. They were just seeing, "Hey, y'all have some space, we can slide this in." So, but I think that's one of the things that we'll be trying to show, right? Is the interest, and then who's actually willing to jump into a study. And then it's a little bit harder to see after the study, how much do people sign up for, right? That entire sort of funnel it might be a little tough on that end, but that's the kind of direction that we were hoping to go with, and see, what are those impacts. But it really is a regulatory policy thing, right? So if the regulatory policy on new large loads becomes more refined, then you might see a lot more of that growth, probably in ways that address the kinds of things that Lauren brought up with cost allocation and all of that kind of thing. So I hopefully that helps, Lisa. But we'll kind of pull all of that information together, because I think that's what we're going to be basing our sort of thoughts on. Is there's a lot going on with a lot of folks, but every region, every location is a little different. So we'll pull together some of that more broader look at the world, but then also show you a little bit more of the details of what's been going on with us.
Yeah, I'll put, I'm sure you folks are aware, hopefully, but there's an energy systems integration group, large loads task force, and one specifically on forecasting. There's lots of great materials. If you are not members, we're supporting that effort through DOE. So you could become members and get access to all the great presentations of what other utilities are doing without having a big history in this area to compare, like, what dropped off, what didn't, which can help a little bit. It is tough.
Yeah, that's great. We'll follow up, Lisa. Thank you.
All right, then we have Eliza next.
Hi, thanks. I just been thinking about this large load question. We've been talking about it a lot at PNEC with our members and the region as a whole. And, I think this really highlights, though, and I think what Philip said is that there are large loads that are looking for places to connect, but it can take a long time to build that infrastructure. And so I think that's it's a little beyond PSE as one utility being able to solve that need to build infrastructure in the region. But that's really a big challenge with these load growths. And we, as a RPAG, need to think about that and how we can support growth in our region. And, I think about it in the context of how Ezra asked, what is conservative or what is not, from a planning perspective. There's the utility side, that risk of loads not showing up. But we also need to think about how do we get infrastructure built.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. I think that it's important to realize that when those large data, when those data centers go away, that's economic activity that we're all losing, right? We all like to hop on the phone and do a quick AI search on stuff. That's not free, right? That takes resources to do it. And it's very challenging, especially in our part of the world, right? Our little corner of the world where we're transmission constrained to across the mountains to us, right? And then the region's generation and transmission constrained. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think it's really important because it's really important for our society to get that right,
Right. Well, thanks for letting me share that thought from a peanut perspective that, we're focused on how can we get things built.
Yeah. Elisa, we have a minute. Do you happen to recall, you've been horsing around with the NRF data, maybe. Do you recall, do you have any numbers, like large load customer numbers, anything that sort of stuck in your mind that you could share?
Not, I don't have this. We don't break out large loads from the overall load forecast. But, in the next 10 years, the forecast shows a growth of 30% from where we are today. And that, we attribute to mostly larger loads, not as much electrification. I was really looking closely at what you were forecasting for the electrification impacts on your load in the 20-year horizon, that 25%. I think we are not getting data that shows for the region as a whole, which is Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and a part of of Montana. We aren't seeing that much electrification, but but state by state, that's a different thing. But yeah, it's about 30% growth, and a lot of that is large loads.
Thank you.
In 10 years, so we're not talking year 20.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that's about 7,700 average megawatts too.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks for that. Nice little back and forth, getting some more information there. And thanks everyone for your questions. This brings us to the end of our call today before the public comment. So what I can do is move us into next steps in public comment. If you want to go to the next slide, and I'm going to put a note in the chat for the public commenters that have raised their hands. So, and you can go to the next slide. So this feedback process slide is really to help provide some clarity on how all of your RPAG feedback is tracked and used throughout this process. PSE introduced this visual a few meetings back, and we're bringing it back at this meeting and at each meeting in the future, just as a reminder to just reorient you with how this full feedback flow works and how input from the RPAG, the Equity Advisory Group, and the public is gathered before, during, and after each meeting and responded to. So whether shared in discussion, submitted in writing, all input is reviewed and summarized and used to inform planning decisions, including the development of the next integrated system plan. So we just are really hoping this visual continues to make that feedback input process more transparent, so you can clearly see how your voice helps shape that work ahead. And if for some reason it doesn't, please feel free to let us know. But this slide, as long as all the other ones from today, are available on the website and in your meeting packet. Okay, next slide. And then looking ahead, we wanted to highlight a couple of things regarding the schedule. So August 5th is the date that the feedback form from this meeting closes. And then you get the month of August off. As you know, many people take vacation before things go back to the fall busyness. And so there's not going to be any public webinars or RPAG meetings in August. So please enjoy that time away. And then we will see you back in the fall in September and reconvene this group then. And as mentioned earlier, a poll is going to go out about finding a meeting date that works for as many people as we can. Okay, next slide. And then if anything comes up between now and then, there's questions, feedback, clarification, please feel free to email isp@pse.com. Use the feedback form on the PSE website, leave a voicemail, you can subscribe to the email list. And then we'll go ahead and put those links in the chat if possible for folks. And I see other people are sharing links, so that's great. Thank you, everyone. And then I wanted to just check if there's any final comments from RPAG members, and I see there's at least one, but I'll just make this call before I go to you, Quinn. Final comments from RPAG members before we move into the public comment section. So yes, Quinn, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to put in a plug for the House Bill 1589 adoption hearing at the commission. I put a link in the chat. That is a place to which the public and other interested parties may give feedback on the rule that will ultimately govern the ISP.
Thanks for that plug and reminder, Quinn. All right, any other final comments or questions before we wrap up and through public comment? Okay. Great. So before we dive into the public comment part, and you can go to the next slide, I'm going to pause. It looks like there's two folks that want to provide public comment today. It's Don Marsh and Tom Kramer. I know you've been to a couple of these past meetings, but this is going to be a slightly different process. We've heard from public commenters that it'd be great to show your video while you're giving your comments. So if the two of you would like to show your video, I'd like you to let us know. I'll go ahead and if you want to unmute yourself, I went ahead and allowed speaking from the both of you. Oh,
I elevated.
Oh, you elevated Don. Okay. Tom, I was just curious, do you want to show your video? If so, we'll elevate you to a panelist. I just want to give you the instructions to do that.
It looks like he's
going to do it. Okay, great. Okay, so it looks like they're figuring it out. It can be a little tricky. Looks like Tom, and let's see if Don made it over too. There he is too. Okay. So let's move down, and then Don and Tom, do you have your videos on?
I think I do. Can you hear me?
Just a second. Yes, there's Don. Great. Okay. And then Tom, do you have your video on? If you need help, I can help you. So on the bottom left, there should be an unmute button. If you just click on the audio microphone, you should be able to unmute. I'll ask you to unmute. There you go. And then Tom, do you have a camera? Would you like us to see you today?
Yeah, that's
there we
fine.
go. Perfect. Okay, we can see you now. So let me just go through my instructions, and then we'll have you give your comments. Okay. So go ahead and go to the next slide. Yeah, great. Okay. So now that we've finished up all the RPAG portion of the meeting, we're going to move into the public comment portion, and we've got two speakers. So each person will have about 3 minutes. As usual, we'll display a timer, although it's giving me problems right now, of course, right when I need to use it. So we'll see if I can get that up. But what I normally do is share a 3-minute timer on the screen so that everyone can see it, including the speakers and folks that are on screen. As mentioned, you're able to share your video today, so glad we could make that available today. And then we just ask that comments stay respectful and focused on today's topics that we covered. And as you know, this isn't a Q&A session, so all the input from today will be included in the feedback summary. And then if we run out of time, just so our PAG members know, we'll go ahead and go just a few minutes over since we're so close to 1 o'clock. But if you have to leave, we understand. And then just thanks in advance for sharing your perspective, both Tom and Dawn. So I had Tom's hand up first. My timer on the screen is not working today, and I'm afraid this is going to crash my computer. So I'm just going to go ahead and put it on my phone, if that's okay. And I'll just give you like a 30-second warning, Dawn, once I get to the last 30 seconds, okay? Okay, so your time has started.
Let's see, did you say Tom or Don?
Sorry, I said Dawn. I'll start you.
Okay, no problem.
Go ahead.
Well, first of all, just thank you for allowing us to appear today. Just it feels a little more human than the disembodied voice. So I appreciate that effort. So I'm Don Marsh. I'm speaking today on behalf of the Sierra Club Washington State Energy Committee and also the Washington Clean Energy Coalition. I've been watching PSE's load forecast since 2013, when PSE initiated the Energize Eastside Transmission Upgrade Project. In 2015, PSE justified that project using peak demand growth rates higher than 2% per year. At the time, we suspected that there were problems with PSE's forecasting methodology, and the prudency of that project is still in question. Ironically, we now have the opposite concern with PSE's current forecasts that predict electric growth between 1.2 and 1.5% annually. It appears to us that PSE is, perhaps illegally, failing to account for load growth that might occur as a result of switching from gas to electric power, as mandated by HB 1589 and the Climate Commitment Act. The problem is clearly illustrated on slides 40 and 42, which show almost no impact on electric loads and peaks due to building electrification. We find this surprising and an unacceptable risk for plants, animals, and future generations of humans. We believe that the entire reason for a joint gas and electric integrated system plan is to coordinate the transition from dirty gas to clean electricity. By this measure, PSE is falling woefully short of the future envisioned by the legislature. We ask PSE and the UTC to reaffirm their commitment to the ISP process and bolster the company's electrification plans immediately. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Thanks, Don, for your comments. And thanks for staying on time. Okay, I've got Tom Kramer up next. Tom, would you like to share your, oh, I see you. Okay, great, Tom. Your time has started. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm Tom Kramer with Third Act Washington. And I was surprised to hear that gas demand is expected to continue growing in the post-HB 1589 world. And to see the very slow gas load reduction that was shown in the graphics. The intent of HB 1589, as stated in the law itself, is for PSE to transition its customers off the direct use of fossil fuels, meaning gas. This will require managing demand loads through electrification and other means. Any growth of gas usage, or even the minimal reduction shown in slide 46 today, is inconsistent with reducing emissions to meet the 95% reduction required by 2050 and the strict interim levels of reduction required under HB 1589. I was glad to hear Philip Popoff's response that this is just a reference case and greater reductions will be seen as planning progresses. Looking at it all together, as he said, in future integrated planning for the two utilities and using electric incentives to drive gas use down will be a good thing. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thanks, Tom, for your comments and also for staying on time. I really appreciate that. Okay. Well, thank you all so much for being here, all your thoughtful input. You can go to the next slide, Jack. We will be following up with, or PSE will be following up with meeting materials. And we really, really, really want to make a ask for you all to fill out the end of meeting poll that pops up. It only takes less than 1 minute. It's 3 questions. And we extended the box so you can write as much as you want, or as close to as much as you want, that they allowed us to on the end of meeting poll. But we want to hear your feedback, especially because we're going to be missing next month and we won't see you again until September. So if there's any way we can improve these meetings, we want to hear that. Please enjoy a month off, and we will see you in September. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Philip to close us out.
Great. Well, thank you all very much. This was a really helpful meeting. Look forward to seeing you all again in September, unless we run into each other before then. So thank you all very much.
Okay.